I texted my family because I was feeling sad that no one remembered my birthday. My son replied saying, "We need space from you, please do not reach out anymore." His wife even liked the message. So I blocked them along with their access to the $50 million fortune they had been living off. The next day, I woke up to 109 missed calls. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an ungrateful family member a lesson they would never forget. The wind off Lake Michigan whipped against the reinforced glass of my penthouse on the 45th floor. From up here, the Chicago winter looked like a beautiful frozen painting, but inside the silence was deafening. I sat alone at a dining table made of Italian marble that cost more than the average car, staring at a single vanilla cupcake I had bought from the bodega downstairs. One small blue candle flickered in the center, casting long dancing shadows across the empty room. My name is Conrad Sullivan. Today I turned 72. To the financial world, I am a ghost, a retired venture capitalist who vanished from Wall Street a decade ago with a portfolio that could buy small countries. But to my son Tyler and his wife Brittany, I am just a lonely retired old man living in a drafty rental apartment that eats up most of my pension. That was the lie I had carefully constructed. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for the 7-figure trust fund I controlled. I wanted Tyler to build his own character, to struggle a little to understand the value of $1. I looked at the Patek Philippe watch on my wrist, another secret luxury I only wore when I was alone. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. The notification light on my phone had not blinked once all day. No calls, no texts, not even an automated email card. I took a sip of cold coffee and scrolled through social media. There they were. Brittany had posted a photo an hour ago. She was wearing a Chanel dress I knew she could not afford, holding a glass of champagne, tagging herself at Le Monde, one of the most expensive 3-star Michelin restaurants in the city. The caption read, "To living our best life with my CEO husband." Tyler was grinning next to her, wearing a suit that I had secretly paid for through a shell company I set up to fund his failing startup. They were celebrating something, but it certainly wasn't my birthday. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, a heaviness that had nothing to do with my age and everything to do with my heart. I had spent 40 years building an empire to give Tyler a head start, but somewhere along the way I had failed to teach him how to be a human being. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the family group chat. I hesitated. Was I being pathetic? Was I being the needy old parent they always complained about behind my back? Maybe. But I was also their father. I typed slowly, my fingers stiff. Today I turned 72. I am sitting here with a cupcake and I just missed you guys. I would love to just hear your voices for a minute. Love, Dad. I hit send. The message bubble turned blue. Delivered. I watched the screen, waiting for the 3 little dots that would indicate someone was typing. 1 minute passed, then 10, then 30. The candle on my cupcake burned down until the wax dripped onto the frosting, extinguishing the tiny flame with a hiss. The room went dark again. I was about to stand up and throw the cupcake into the trash when the phone finally buzzed. My heart jumped. I grabbed it, hoping for an apology or maybe a late dinner invitation. It was a reply from Tyler. I put on my reading glasses and squinted at the screen. The words were sharp, concise, and brutal. "Dad, we are busy entertaining important clients. We have talked about this. You are being suffocating. We need space from you. Please do not reach out anymore at all. We will call you when we are ready." Below his message, a small notification popped up. Brittany liked, "We need space from you." I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't cry, I didn't throw the phone. A strange, cold calm washed over me, replacing the sadness. It was the same feeling I used to get right before I executed a hostile takeover in the boardroom. It was the clarity of a man who realizes a deal has gone bad, and it is time to cut his losses. Space. They wanted space. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. I picked up the cupcake and dropped it into the wastebasket. Then I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. I logged into the secure server of my bank in Zurich. The interface glowed blue in the dark room. I navigated to the sub-accounts labeled Tyler and Brittany. I looked at the monthly allowance of $50,000 that automatically transferred to cover their mortgage, their car leases, and their credit card bills. They thought this money came from Tyler's business profits. They thought they were self-made. I hovered the mouse over the button that said Active. If they wanted space, I would give them the biggest, coldest, most expensive empty space they had ever known. I clicked Deactivate. Then I pulled up the credit card management portal. 3 black cards with unlimited limits. Status active. I selected all 3. I clicked Report Lost or Stolen. Suspend immediately. I closed the laptop. The silence in the penthouse no longer felt lonely. It felt powerful. I poured myself a glass of vintage whiskey, sat back in my leather chair, and waited for the fallout. It was going to be a long night for them, but for me, the party was just getting started. The silence in the penthouse was not peaceful. It was heavy like a physical weight pressing against my chest. 2 hours had passed since I sent that text. 120 minutes of staring at a screen that refused to light up. I watched the city lights of Chicago flicker below millions of people living their lives, connecting, laughing, while I sat in the dark with a stale cupcake and a heart full of foolish hope. I told myself they were just busy. I told myself Tyler was probably driving or in a meeting. I made excuses for them, just like I had done for 30 years. Then the phone buzzed. The sound was loud in the empty room, startling me. My hand shot out to grab it, a reflex born of desperation. The screen illuminated my face in the darkness. It was a message from Tyler. For a split second, relief washed over me. He had replied. He remembered. I put on my reading glasses, my fingers trembling slightly as I unlocked the phone. I expected an apology. I expected a late dinner invitation. I expected at the very least a happy birthday. I read the words once, then twice, then a third time, trying to make the sentences rearrange themselves into something that didn't feel like a knife twisting in my gut. Dad, we are busy entertaining important clients. We have talked about this. You are being suffocating. We need space from you. Please do not reach out anymore at all. We will call you when we are ready. The breath left my lungs in a sharp hiss. Suffocating. I was suffocating, I who had paid for his private schools, his Ivy League tuition, his first car, his second car, his wedding, and the roof over his head, who had stayed in the shadows so he could shine. Then a second notification pinged. A small heart icon. Brittany liked the message. That small digital thumbs up was the final blow. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a mockery. My daughter-in-law, the woman who posted photos of her perfect life funded by my wire transfers, was cheering on my own son's cruelty. They weren't just busy. They were annoyed by my existence. To them, I wasn't a father or a benefactor. I was a lingering obligation, a nuisance, an old man who didn't know his place. I sat there for a long time, the phone screen dimming and then going black in my hand. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the crushing sadness that usually follows heartbreak. But it didn't come. Instead, something else happened. A coldness spread through my veins, freezing the pain instantly. It was a familiar sensation, one I hadn't felt since my days in the boardroom, when a competitor tried to hostilely take over my company. It was the absolute crystalline clarity of war. They wanted space. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. They wanted distance from the man, but they had never once asked for distance from the money. They wanted the fruit, but despised the tree. I stood up and walked to the window, my reflection staring back at me against the night sky. The sad, lonely old man who had sat down at this table 2 hours ago was gone. In his place stood Conrad Sullivan, the man who once made Wall Street tremble. I looked at the phone one last time. If it was space they wanted, I would give them the vastest, coldest, most expensive vacuum they had ever experienced. I wouldn't block them out of anger. I would block them out of principle. And I would start by cutting the only cord that truly connected us, the one made of gold. I walked over to the heavy oak desk in the corner of the room, the only piece of furniture in the penthouse that I actually owned. It was solid, immovable, and scarred from years of work, much like the truth I had been hiding for a decade. I sat down and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, cutting through the shadows. I didn't open email or social media. I launched a secure browser and navigated to the portal of the Zurich Canton Bank. My fingers moved automatically, typing in a complex 30-character password I had memorized long ago. Then came the biometric scan. I pressed my thumb against the reader. A moment later, the screen flashed, "Access granted." Rows of numbers and diversified portfolios filled the display. To the world, and specifically to my son, I was Conrad Sullivan, the retiree who complained about the price of heating oil and drove a 10-year-old sedan. But on this screen, I was a portfolio worth over $50 million. I scrolled past the municipal bonds and the international equities until I reached the sub-account labeled Family Trust Beneficiary Tyler Sullivan. I stared at the number in the recurring transfer column. $50,000. Every single month on the first, that sum silently left my account and landed in Tyler's. For 5 years, he had believed this money was revenue from his tech startup, Technovation. He walked around with his chest puffed out, believing he was a self-made genius CEO who had conquered the market. He had no idea that his company's biggest client, the mysterious angel investor known only as Zeus, was actually his father sitting in the dark. I clicked on the transaction breakdown. It was a manifesto of their ingratitude. Mortgage payment for the 6-bedroom house in the suburbs, $12,000. Leases for the Porsche and the Tesla, $4,000. The automatic payment for Brittany's credit card, covering her influencer lifestyle, ranged between $15,000 and $20,000 a month. It was all there. The trips to Tulum, the designer handbags, the 3-star Michelin dinners. They weren't living the American dream. They were living on my lifeblood, funded by my past sacrifices, while they treated me like a lingering ghost they wished would just disappear. We need space. The words echoed in my mind, mocking me. They wanted space from the man, but they had certainly never asked for space from the money. I looked at the cursor hovering on the screen. It was resting over a small green button that read, "Status active." My hand didn't tremble. The hesitation I had felt earlier, that nagging fatherly instinct to protect my boy from the harshness of the world, was gone. It had been incinerated by his text message. I was back in the boardroom now. I was looking at a failing investment, a project that was bleeding capital and producing zero returns. In business, you don't keep pouring water into a bucket with a hole in the bottom. You throw the bucket away. If they wanted space, I would give them the vacuum of space. Absolute freezing nothingness. I clicked the button. A dialog box popped up in the center of the screen. Warning. This will immediately suspend all scheduled transfers and freeze all linked credit lines. Are you sure I didn't look at the framed photo on the desk of Tyler at his graduation? I didn't think about the day he was born. I thought about the silence of my phone on my 72nd birthday. I thought about Brittany liking the message that told me to go away. I clicked yes. The screen refreshed. The green active button turned to a stark gray, suspended. I wasn't done. I navigated to the corporate holding accounts for Technovation. As the majority shareholder through my shell company, I had full administrative privileges. I located the operational expense account and the payroll funding. I selected freeze assets pending audit. I closed the laptop with a soft final click. The room was dark again, but the heavy feeling in my chest had lifted. They were probably at dinner right now, ordering another bottle of vintage wine, laughing about how they had finally set boundaries with the suffocating old man. They had no idea that the credit card in Tyler's pocket was now just a piece of plastic, and the ground beneath their feet had already ceased to exist. While I sat in the darkness of my penthouse miles away in the glittering heart of the Gold Coast, the party at Le Monde was reaching a fever pitch. I knew this because Brittany, true to her nature, was broadcasting the entire spectacle to her 50,000 followers. I watched through the screen of my phone as the camera panned across a long table draped in white linen, surrounded by 20 of their closest friends, a collection of social climbers and hangers-on, who stuck to my son like barnacles to a hull. The atmosphere was electric, with the kind of unearned confidence that only comes from spending someone else's money. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over their faces, softening the edges of their arrogance. Tyler sat at the head of the table, his face flushed, holding court like a conquering king. He was wearing the bespoke Italian suit I had paid for last month, gesturing grandly with a crystal flute. I turned up the volume. The noise of clinking silverware and raucous laughter filled my silent room. "I have a special announcement," Tyler shouted over the din, his voice slurring slightly. "To boundaries. And to growth. Today, we finally cut the dead weight." A cheer went up around the table. Brittany giggled, turning the camera to face herself. Her lips were painted a bright, aggressive red. She leaned into Tyler's shoulder and held up her phone, showing the screen to the camera. It was the text message thread. My text message thread. "You guys have to see this," she said to her live audience, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Tyler's dad is literally obsessed with us. He's so suffocating. We had to literally tell him to back off today on his birthday. Can you believe the audacity?" The comments on the side of the screen rolled by in a blur of laughing emojis and validation. "Good for you guys. Toxic parents are the worst. Protect your peace." I watched as my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, nodded in agreement. "Yeah," he said, pouring more champagne. "It's tough being the CEO of a major startup and having to manage an elderly parent who just refuses to let go. But Technovation is hitting record numbers this quarter, so we are celebrating independence. Garçon." He snapped his fingers at a passing waiter. The arrogance of the gesture made my stomach turn. "Bring us the Domaine de la Romanée Conti, the 1990. And keep them coming for the whole table." My eyes widened. I knew that wine. I knew the price tag. $5,000 a bottle. He was ordering it like it was tap water. He wasn't just celebrating. He was burning through capital to prove a point. He was trying to prove to these people, and perhaps to himself, that he was a titan of industry, a man of limitless resources. He had no idea that the man he called suffocating was the only reason the lights in his office were still on. He had no idea that the record numbers he bragged about were just transfers from my personal trust. Brittany squealed with delight as the sommelier presented the dusty bottle with white-gloved hands. To the good life, she screamed, raising her glass. To space, Tyler added, clinking his glass against hers. I watched them drink. I watched them laugh at my expense. I watched them devour the illusion I had built for them. They looked so happy, so secure, floating in a bubble of invincibility. They thought they were standing on the summit of the world. They couldn't see that they were actually dancing on the edge of a cliff, and I had just removed the safety net. The wine flowed, the laughter grew louder, and the bill grew astronomical. It was the last supper of their delusion, and they were enjoying every expensive bite. The bill arrived on a small silver tray tucked discreetly inside a leather folio. It sat there for a moment, a silent grenade waiting to detonate. I could imagine the total. With 20 guests, the tasting menu, and 4 bottles of the Romanée Conti, the tab would easily exceed $25,000. That is more than most families earn in 6 months burned in 4 hours of gluttony. Tyler didn't even open the folder. He didn't check the itemized list. He didn't verify the total. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the heavy black titanium card. It was the Centurion card, the ultimate symbol of status issued in my name but authorized for his use. He tossed it onto the tray with a casual flick of his wrist, not even breaking eye contact with the man across from him. "Add 25% for yourself," he told the waiter, his voice booming with generosity. The waiter bowed and disappeared. The table continued to buzz. Brittany was now showing off her diamond bracelet to the camera, talking about how hard Tyler worked to treat everyone. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The waiter returned. He wasn't bowing this time. He walked with a stiff, uncomfortable gait, clutching the folio tightly against his chest. He leaned down to Tyler's ear, trying to be discreet, but the room had gone quiet enough that the whisper carried like a scream. "I am terribly sorry, sir," the waiter said, his voice strained. The card was declined. Tyler laughed. It was a loud, incredulous bark. "That is impossible," he said loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "That card has no limit. Run it again. The chip is probably dirty." "We tried it 3 times, sir," the waiter replied, his patience thinning. "The bank has flagged it as invalid." "Do you have another form of payment?" Tyler rolled his eyes, performing his annoyance for his guests. He pulled out his wallet. "Fine," he huffed. "Use the platinum. Or the gold. Just get it done." He threw 2 more cards onto the table. The waiter took them and walked away. The conversation at the table started to stutter. People were exchanging glances. The air of invincibility was leaking out of the room. A few minutes later, the waiter returned. This time, the manager was with him. The manager was a tall man with a face like stone. "Mr. Sullivan," the manager said, his voice icy. "All of these cards have been reported lost or stolen. They have been deactivated. We need a valid form of payment immediately, or we will be forced to involve the authorities." The color drained from Tyler's face. He looked at the plastic rectangles on the table as if they were alien artifacts. He looked at his friends who were suddenly interested in their napkins. The silence was absolute. The humiliation was total. Brittany dropped her phone. The live stream ended abruptly, but the panic was just beginning. She grabbed Tyler's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "What is going on?" she hissed. "Pay the bill, Tyler. Fix this." "I can't," Tyler stammered. "They aren't working." Brittany's eyes darted around the room, seeing the judgment on the faces of the social climbers she tried so hard to impress. Panic overrode her pride. She fumbled for her phone, her trembling fingers dialing the one number she had sworn never to call again. She called me. I watched my phone on the desk light up. Brittany calling. The vibration buzzed against the wood. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I imagined her in that restaurant, sweating in her designer dress, the manager looming over them, the bill sitting there like a judgment. She needed the suffocating old man now. She needed the safety net. I reached out and silenced the ringer. The room went quiet again. They wanted space. I was simply respecting their wishes. My phone stopped ringing. The screen went dark, returning the room to its peaceful, heavy silence. I did not pick up. I did not text back, asking if everything was okay. I simply let the call die, just like they had let our relationship die with a single text message. They wanted to be independent adults, and the first rule of adulthood is that you pay your own bills. Back at the restaurant, the reality of their situation was crashing down with the weight of a collapsing building. The 20 guests, the so-called friends, who had been cheering for Tyler's success 5 minutes ago, suddenly remembered they had early meetings, babysitters to relieve, and rides waiting outside. I knew exactly how it played out. It is the same in business as it is in life. When the money stops flowing, the parasites detach. One by one, they mumbled awkward apologies, avoiding Tyler's desperate eyes, and slipped out the door, leaving him alone with the manager, and a bill that equaled the price of a mid-sized sedan. Tyler stood there sweating through his custom suit. He tried to argue. He tried to pull the "do you know who I am" card. But the manager, a man who had seen 1,000 pretenders come and go, was unimpressed. He did not care about Tyler's startup. He did not care about his Instagram followers. He cared about the $28,000 of food and wine that had been consumed. "If you cannot pay, sir," the manager said, his voice loud enough to silence the remaining diners, "I will call the police. Theft of services is a felony." The word felony hung in the air. Tyler looked at Brittany, who was sobbing into her napkin, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. She had no money. Her cards were extensions of mine. They were trapped. "I have a watch," Tyler whispered, his voice trembling. He fumbled with the clasp on his wrist. It was a Rolex Daytona, a masterpiece of Swiss engineering with a panda dial. I had bought it for him when he turned 30, engraving the back with the words, "Time is money. Use it wisely." He unclasped it and handed it over. The manager held it up to the light, inspecting it with a jeweler's eye. "It will serve as collateral," the manager said coldly. "But you will also sign a promissory note admitting to the debt. And you have 24 hours to return with cash, or the watch belongs to us, and we file charges." Tyler signed the paper with a shaking hand. He signed away his dignity. He signed away his pride. He left the restaurant not as a CEO, but as a man who had to pawn his father's gift just to escape a jail cell. He walked out into the Chicago night, the cold wind biting through his thin suit, while his wife trailed behind him, no longer recording, no longer smiling. They were alone. And for the first time in their lives, they were truly poor. It was 1 o'clock in the morning when I made the call that would dismantle my son's life. The city outside my penthouse window was a grid of sleeping lights, quiet and unsuspecting. But inside my chest, a war drum was beating. I stood by the glass looking at my reflection. I did not see a heartbroken father anymore. I saw a liquidator. I saw a man who had decided to close a bankrupt division of his own soul. I dialed the number for Kowalski. He was my personal attorney, a man with the legal ethics of a shark and the loyalty of a Doberman. He picked up on the first ring. He always did. Kowalski didn't sleep. He just waited for the next crisis. "Mr. Sullivan," his voice rasped, sounding like gravel grinding against concrete. "It is late. It is time, Kowalski." I said, my voice steady and cold. "I am activating the revocation clause, Clause 14 of the Family Trust." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the distinct click of a lighter. I could hear him inhale deeply. Clause 14. The nuclear option. "You are asking for a full asset recovery, Conrad. This means the house, the vehicles, the voting shares in the company. Everything. Once I file these motions, there is no going back." "Are you absolutely certain?" I looked at the empty table where my birthday cupcake had sat hours ago. I thought about the text message. "We need space." "I am certain," I replied. "I want it all back. Every single asset that is legally titled to me or the trust. I want the house in the suburbs secured. I want the Technovation shares frozen. And I want the vehicles repossessed, immediately." "Tonight?" Kowalski asked. "Before the sun comes up," I said. "I want them to wake up in a world that they actually own, which according to my calculations is absolutely nothing." "Consider it done," Kowalski said. "The repo teams are on retainer. I will send the notice of eviction by courier at dawn." I hung up the phone and poured the rest of my whiskey down the sink. I didn't need the drink to numb me anymore. The decision was the drug. Miles away in the quiet, affluent suburb where my son lived, the silence of the winter night was broken by the low rumble of diesel engines. I wasn't there, but I knew the procedure perfectly. 2 unmarked tow trucks rolled down the street, their amber lights flashing rhythmically against the snow-covered trees. They didn't use sirens. They didn't knock on the door. They were predators coming for their prey. The first truck backed into the driveway, positioning itself in front of the silver Porsche 911 Carrera. It was Tyler's pride and joy, the car he parked in the front spot at every valet stand, the car he revved at stoplights to make sure people looked at him. The driver hopped out, hooked the chains to the axle, and engaged the winch. With a mechanical whine, the German engineering was lifted into the air, dangling helplessly like a toy. The second truck went for Brittany's Tesla Model X, the white SUV she used as a backdrop for half of her social media videos. It was loaded up in less than 3 minutes. Inside the dark house, Tyler and Brittany were likely sleeping the deep, exhausted sleep of the deluded. They probably thought the restaurant incident was just a banking error, a glitch I would fix in the morning with a phone call and an apology. They didn't hear the chains rattling. They didn't see their status symbols being dragged away into the darkness, leaving nothing behind but empty oil stains on the concrete. The umbilical cord had been cut, and the harsh cold of reality was rushing in. The sun rose over Lake Michigan, a pale, icy blue illuminating the sharp edges of the Chicago skyline. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse holding a steaming mug of Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee. It was the kind of morning I usually spent reading the Wall Street Journal and worrying about whether my son had remembered to pay his property tax. But today the worry was gone. In its place was a strange, vibrating energy. It was the adrenaline of the hunt. I walked over to the kitchen island, where I had left my phone face down the night before. I turned it over. The screen lit up like a slot machine hitting a jackpot. The number was staggering. 109 missed calls. I scrolled through the notification history. It was a digital timeline of their descent into madness. The calls started at 11:30 last night, right after the restaurant incident. Then there was a cluster at 3 a.m, followed by a frantic barrage at 5:15, which I assumed was the moment they realized their driveway was empty. I unlocked the phone and opened the text thread. It was fascinating to watch the tone shift. At midnight, Tyler had written, "Dad, pick up the phone. There is a glitch with the bank. We are stuck. Call the bank now." By 2 a.m, the tone had shifted to aggression. "You are embarrassing us. Fix this immediately. If this is some kind of sick joke about the birthday text, it isn't funny." By 5:30, the panic had set in. The cars are gone. Someone stole the Porsche and the Tesla. "Dad, please answer. We called the police and they said the vehicles were repossessed. That is impossible. Call us back." And finally at 7 o'clock, a message from Brittany. "Please, Conrad. We are scared. We don't have cash for a cab. We are stranded. Just call us." I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark flavor. I did not feel a twinge of guilt. I did not feel the urge to rescue them. For 30 years I had been their firefighter, rushing in to extinguish every flame they lit. Today I was the one holding the matches. I did not text back. Texting was too informal, too intimate for the new relationship dynamic we had established. Instead, I walked to my laptop and opened my email client. I composed a new message addressed to Tyler and Brittany. Subject, respace. I typed slowly, ensuring every word was precise. "Dear Tyler and Brittany, I received your message yesterday regarding your need for space and independence. I have spent the night reflecting on your request, and I realized you are absolutely right. Boundaries are healthy. Independence is necessary. Therefore, effective immediately, I am granting you the total space you asked for. I have removed myself completely from your financial lives to ensure you have the freedom to succeed on your own merits without my suffocating influence. The cars, the house, and the allowance were clearly holding you back from your true potential. Per your request, I will not reach out anymore. I trust you will figure out the logistics of your new life. Respectfully, Dad." I read it over once. It was polite. It was professional. It was devastating. I hit send. Then I turned off my phone again. The hunt was over for the morning. Now it was time to watch them run. The silence in the six-bedroom suburban mansion was different that morning. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of luxury. It was the dead, heavy silence of abandonment. Tyler woke up shivering. He pulled the Egyptian cotton duvet tighter around his chin, but the chill had already seeped into the mattress. He reached for the thermostat control on his bedside table, tapping the glass screen. Nothing happened. The display remained black. He sat up, his breath forming a visible cloud in the bedroom air. The radiant floor heating, usually set to a comfortable 72 degrees, was stone cold beneath his feet. "Brittany," he called out, his voice raspy from the stress of the previous night. "Is the power out?" From the master bathroom, a scream answered him. It wasn't a scream of terror, but of pure, spoiled frustration. Tyler ran in to find his wife wrapped in a towel, staring at the rainfall showerhead, with betrayal in her eyes. "There is no water," she shrieked. I turned the handle, and nothing came out. Not even a drip. "I can't wash my face. I can't brush my teeth. What is happening?" Tyler grabbed his phone. No Wi-Fi signal. The smart home system, which controlled everything from the blinds to the security locks, was offline. The house was dead. He navigated to his cellular data, desperate to check the utility accounts. But the realization hit him before the page even loaded. The utilities weren't in his name. They never had been. They were in the name of the Sullivan Family Trust. Dad, Tyler whispered the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. He cut the power. He cut the water. He ran out of the bedroom, down the grand staircase, and toward the garage. Brittany followed, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood. They reached the door connecting the kitchen to the garage. Tyler hit the button for the automatic opener. Nothing. The power was out. He had to find the manual release cord in the dark, yanking it down with a curse before heaving the heavy door upward. The gray morning light flooded into the cavernous space, revealing absolutely nothing. The garage was empty. Where the silver Porsche 911 and the white Tesla Model X had been parked just hours ago, there were now only dry patches of concrete and the faint mocking smell of rubber. They were gone. It hadn't been a nightmare. It hadn't been a mistake. The tow trucks had come in the night, like thieves taking the symbols of their status while they slept. Tyler fell to his knees on the cold concrete. Brittany stared at the empty space, her hands covering her mouth. "How could he do this?" she sobbed. "He gave us those cars. They were gifts." But as Tyler looked around the freezing garage, a darker realization began to dawn on him. He scrambled to his feet and ran to the front door of the house. He threw it open. Taped to the heavy mahogany wood right at eye level was a bright orange document. It wasn't a note. It was a legal notice. Notice to vacate. Tyler ripped it off the door, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. Occupancy agreement terminated. Property of the Conrad Sullivan Revocable Trust. Occupants have no lease, no title, and no rights of possession. Trespassing. He dropped the paper. He looked at Brittany, his face pale. "We don't own the house," he whispered, the horror making his voice tremble. "We never owned it. He told us it was a wedding gift, but he kept the deed in the trust. We are just guests, Brittany, and our reservation has just been canceled. It took them 45 minutes to cross the city. They arrived not in the sleek black Porsche or the pristine white Tesla, but in the back of a rattling rideshare sedan that smelled of stale pine air freshener. I watched the security feed from the comfort of my living room as the car pulled up to the curb. Tyler stepped out first, wearing yesterday's suit, which was now wrinkled and stained with sweat. Brittany followed, wrapped in a coat that cost more than the driver's car, but looking frantic and disheveled, her unwashed hair tucked hastily under a beanie. They marched toward the revolving glass doors of the Pinnacle with the desperate entitlement of people who refuse to believe their key to the castle has been taken away. I saw Tyler reach into his pocket and pull out his platinum access fob. For 5 years, that small piece of plastic had been his magic wand. It opened the private gates called the elevator and granted him access to the rooftop lounge where he liked to impress his friends. He strode up to the security turnstile and tapped the fob against the reader, not even breaking his stride. The machine let out a harsh, low buzz. A red light flashed. Access denied. Tyler stopped, confused. He tapped it again, harder this time. Buzz. Red light. He looked at the device as if it had personally insulted him. Brittany pushed past him, holding her own fob, and slapped it against the sensor. The result was the same. The glass barriers remained firmly shut. The morning rush was in full swing. Bankers and lawyers in sharp coats were streaming past them, tapping their cards and flowing through the gates like water. Tyler and Brittany stood there like stones in a river, obstructing the flow, their confusion rapidly mutating into panic. "Hey, Tyler," shouted at the security desk. "Henry, open the gate. The system is down." Henry, the head of daytime security, a man I had tipped generously every Christmas for 2 decades, did not look up from his monitor. He simply pressed a button on his console. Tyler slammed his hand on the turnstile. "Henry, open this up. My father is upstairs." Henry finally stood up. He was a large man, an ex-Marine who wore his uniform with impeccable precision. He walked around the desk and stood on the other side of the glass barrier, his face impassive. "Mr. Sullivan," Henry said calmly, "your fobs have been deactivated by the resident. You are no longer on the approved guest list. I cannot let you up." That is when the performance began. Tyler realized that force wouldn't work, so he switched to the only other weapon he had left: manipulation. He turned to the crowded lobby, raising his voice so that every resident waiting for the elevator could hear. "He is confused," Tyler yelled, pointing a trembling finger at the ceiling. "My father is 72 years old. He is having a mental episode. He locked us out because he doesn't know who we are. He is off his medication." Brittany jumped in right on cue, grabbing the arm of a woman passing by. "Please, you have to help us. He is up there all alone. He could be hurting himself. He thinks we are enemies. He is suffering from dementia, and he has cut off his own family. We just want to save him." The lobby went quiet. People stopped. They looked at the young, desperate couple pleading for their father's safety. For a moment, I saw the doubt in their eyes. The narrative was compelling. The loving son trying to reach his senile, paranoid father. It was a perfect lie delivered with the hysterical conviction of 2 people who were terrified, not for my safety, but for their own survival. Henry didn't blink. He had his orders. But Tyler was escalating. He grabbed the metal bars of the turnstile and shook them, his face twisting into a mask of faux righteous agony. "If anything happens to him, it is on you, Henry. I am going to call the police. I am going to tell them you are holding a sick man hostage." It was a brilliant show. If I hadn't been the one holding the remote control to their lives, I might have even believed it myself. But they weren't screaming because they loved me. They were screaming because they were cold. They were broke, and the only ATM they had ever known had just locked its doors. Henry was reaching for his radio to call the police, his patience finally exhausted by Tyler's theatrics, when the elevator doors behind the security desk slid open with a soft chime. Out stepped a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed in a suit that cost more than my son's entire failing company. It was Saul Kowalski. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like an executioner who had arrived early for work. He walked past the security desk, his leather briefcase swinging rhythmically at his side. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Henry. He walked straight up to the glass barrier where Tyler was still gripping the metal bars, his face red with fake concern. "Step away from the gate," Mr. Sullivan, Kowalski said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the lobby like a razor blade. Tyler stopped screaming. He looked at Kowalski, squinting in recognition. He remembered him as the boring family attorney who handled my taxes, a man he had ignored for years. Tyler straightened his jacket, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "Kowalski, thank God," Tyler said, exhaling a breath of relief. "Tell this gorilla to let us up. My father is having a breakdown. He locked us out. We need to get to him before he hurts himself." Kowalski didn't blink. He didn't smile. He simply reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with a red wax stamp. He slid it under the glass partition. It stopped right at the toes of Tyler's scuffed dress shoes. "Your father is perfectly fine, Tyler," Kowalski said, his tone flat. "In fact, he is watching you right now. But you are not going up there. Not today. Not ever." "What is this?" Tyler asked, looking down at the envelope with disdain. "That is an emergency ex parte order of protection," Kowalski explained, clasping his hands behind his back. "It was signed by a judge 20 minutes ago. It alleges financial abuse, harassment, and emotional distress caused by you and your wife against a vulnerable senior citizen." Brittany gasped. "Abuse? We never abused him. We love him." Kowalski turned his cold eyes to her. "Financial coercion is abuse, Mrs. Sullivan. Draining an old man's retirement accounts to buy handbags is abuse, and screaming in his lobby that he is demented is harassment." Tyler kicked the envelope. "This is bullshit. I am his son. I have rights. I am going up there." He made a move to jump the turnstile. It was a bluff, a desperate attempt to show dominance, but Kowalski didn't flinch. He just checked his watch. "Go ahead, Tyler," Kowalski challenged softly. "Take that step. The order mandates that you stay 500 feet away from Conrad Sullivan, his residence and his place of business at all times. If your foot touches the floor on this side of the glass, you are in violation of a court order. That is an immediate arrest. No bail hearing until Monday." "Do you want to spend the weekend in county jail wearing that suit?" Tyler froze. His foot hovered in the air for a second, before he slowly placed it back on the ground on his side of the line. The crowd in the lobby, which had been sympathetic just moments ago, was now whispering. They saw the lawyer. They saw the legal papers. The narrative had shifted. Tyler wasn't a worried son anymore. He was a predator who had just been leashed. Brittany grabbed Tyler's arm, pulling him back toward the revolving doors. "Come on," she hissed, her face pale. "Let's go. We have to call a lawyer." Kowalski watched them retreat, his expression unchanging. "Just so you know," he called out to their backs, "I have also served copies of this order to every bank in Chicago. Good luck opening a new account." Tyler didn't look back. He pushed through the doors into the cold, leaving the envelope lying on the floor like a piece of trash. Up in the penthouse, I took a sip of my coffee. The first battle was won. But I knew my son. Desperation makes people creative, and the war was far from over. They did not check into the Four Seasons. They did not even check into a Holiday Inn. With their credit cards frozen, their bank accounts locked, and only $200 of emergency cash Tyler found crumpled in his jacket pocket, my son and his wife ended up at the Sleep Ease Motel on the edge of the industrial district. It was the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and smelled permanently of stale cigarettes and regret. I can only imagine the shock to their systems. Just 24 hours ago, they were sleeping on 800 thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets. Now they were staring at a polyester bedspread patterned with cigarette burns. The neon sign outside their window buzzed with a dying epileptic flicker, casting a sickly red strobe light across the cramped room. Brittany stood in the center of the sticky carpet, refusing to take off her white Balenciaga coat. She looked like a swan trapped in a sewer. She stared at the bathroom door, which was hanging off its hinges, and then she turned to Tyler. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a venomous, panicked rage. "This is it," she screamed, her voice cracking. "This is your solution. We are sleeping in a crack den." Tyler was sitting on the edge of the sagging mattress, his head in his hands. He looked defeated, stripping off his Italian silk tie, as if it were a noose. "It is just for tonight, Brittany," he muttered. "Just until I get hold of a lawyer. Just until I fix this. Fix this, she laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. You cannot even fix the Wi-Fi on your phone, Tyler. You are useless. You told me you owned the company. You told me the trust fund was ironclad. You lied to me. I did not lie, Tyler snapped, standing up to face her. The room was so small they were almost nose to nose. Dad manipulated everything. He set us up. Oh, blame your daddy, Brittany sneered. That is all you ever do. You are 32 years old and you cannot buy a sandwich without his permission. I married a CEO, Tyler. I did not marry a charity case who drags me into a roach motel. The air in the room grew heavy with resentment. This was the first crack in their perfect, curated marriage. As long as the money was flowing, they were the perfect team united in their greed and entitlement. But without the grease of my wealth, the gears of their relationship were grinding together, sparking and screeching. Tyler glared at her, his face flushing red. Maybe if you hadn't spent $15,000 on handbags last month, we would have some savings, he shouted. Maybe if you didn't need a new outfit for every single Instagram post, we wouldn't be broke the second the tap ran dry. You bled me dry, Brittany. I bled you dry, she screamed back, shoving him. You encouraged it. You wanted the trophy wife. You wanted the image. Well, look at the image now, Tyler. We are homeless. We are nobodies. And it is entirely your fault because you were too stupid to secure the assets. She grabbed her purse and marched into the tiny bathroom, slamming the door so hard that a piece of plaster fell from the ceiling. Tyler kicked the nightstand, sending the cheap plastic lamp crashing to the floor. He sat back down on the bed, burying his face in his hands again. The buzzing neon light flickered on and off, illuminating a man who was realizing for the first time that he brought absolutely nothing to the table but his last name. And right now, that name wasn't worth the price of a cheap motel room. The silence that followed their argument was thick and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic dripping of a leaky faucet in the bathroom. Tyler sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the stained carpet, his mind racing like a rat in a trap. He needed a way out. He needed a solution that did not involve getting a job or apologizing, because both of those options were beneath him. He replayed the events of the last 24 hours in his head. The text message, the eviction, the lawyer in the lobby. Suddenly, he stopped. He remembered what he had shouted in the lobby of the Pinnacle. He is confused. He is having a mental episode. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who had just found a weapon in the mud. Brittany, he said, his voice low and steady. Come out here. Brittany emerged from the bathroom, her eyes puffy and red. She looked at him with exhaustion. What do you want, Tyler? If you're going to tell me to calm down again, I am leaving. I am not going to tell you to calm down, Tyler said, standing up. I am going to tell you how we get it all back. The house, the cars, the money, everything. Brittany crossed her arms, skeptical. How you just said we are blocked. The lawyer said we would go to jail if we got close to him. We are looking at this the wrong way, Tyler explained, pacing the small room. We are acting like victims of a mean father. But what if we change the narrative? What if we are the victims of a sick father? Brittany frowned. He isn't sick, Tyler. He is sharper than both of us combined. It does not matter what he is, Tyler snapped. It matters what we can prove. Think about it. He is 72 years old. He lives alone. He has no other family. And out of nowhere, he makes a massive, irrational financial decision that destroys his only son's life. He cuts off contact. He acts paranoid. To an outsider, that does not look like punishment. That looks like dementia. He paused, letting the word hang in the air. Dementia. If we can prove he is mentally incompetent. Tyler continued, the excitement building in his voice, then his decisions are legally void. The eviction, the frozen accounts, the restraining order, all of it gets thrown out. The court will have to appoint a legal guardian to manage his estate. A conservator. Brittany's eyes widened as the realization hit her. Conservatorship. Like they do with celebrities who lose their minds. Exactly, Tyler said. And who is the most logical choice to be his guardian, his only son? If I get conservatorship, I become Conrad Sullivan. I control the trust. I control the bank accounts. I control him. We can put him in a nice facility somewhere very quiet and very far away, and we move back into the house. We get our lives back, Brittany, and we get to be the heroes who saved him from himself. But we need a doctor. Brittany whispered, the fear mixing with greed in her eyes. A judge will not just take our word for it. Tyler reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts, until he found a name from his past, a man who had helped him get a prescription for painkillers when he did not really need them. Doctors are just people, Brittany, Tyler said darkly, and people can be persuaded. We just need to find one who likes money as much as we do. He hit the call button. The desperation in the room had shifted into something far more sinister. They were no longer just spoiled children throwing a tantrum. They were conspirators plotting to strip a man of his freedom. The call was made from the cramped, moldy bathroom of the Sleep Ease motel, with the exhaust fan rattling overhead to mask the conversation. Tyler sat on the closed lid of the toilet, his knees bouncing nervously as the phone rang. He was dialing Dr. Aris Thorne, a man whose medical license was less of a credential and more of a shield for his criminal activities. Thorne was a concierge doctor for the city's elite, the kind of physician who didn't ask why you needed a prescription for high-grade opioids or why you had a bruise that matched the shape of a golf club. He was a man who understood that truth was a flexible commodity, provided the price was right. Thorne answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and detached, like he was discussing a dinner reservation rather than a conspiracy. Tyler didn't waste time with pleasantries. He knew that men like Thorne smelled desperation, the way sharks smell blood. I have a situation with my father, Tyler said, keeping his voice low so Brittany wouldn't overhear the specifics from the bedroom. He has become unmanageable. His behavior is erratic. He is spending the family fortune on delusions. We need to step in legally, Aris. We need to take control before there is nothing left. There was a pause on the other end. I assume you are talking about a conservatorship, Thorne said. That is a heavy legal maneuver, Tyler. You need more than just stories about erratic behavior. You need medical evidence. You need a diagnosis that proves he lacks the capacity to make decisions. That is why I am calling you, Tyler, replied, sweat beading on his forehead. We need that evidence. But the problem is my father refuses to see a doctor. He thinks he is fine. So we need a doctor who is willing to look at the history and make a professional assessment without the patient being present. Or perhaps a doctor who can recall that he has been treating the patient for months already. The implication hung in the air, heavy and illegal. Tyler was asking Thorne to fabricate a medical history to create a paper trail of dementia that didn't exist. He was asking him to perjure himself to strip a man of his civil rights. Thorne let out a slow, calculated sigh. Retroactive diagnoses are complicated, Tyler. They require detailed notes, dates, observations of cognitive decline. It takes a lot of time to create a file that can withstand the scrutiny of a probate judge, and time, as you know, is expensive. I will pay you $50,000, Tyler blurted out. Cash? Thorne asked. I don't have cash right now. Tyler admitted, his voice tightening. But once the conservatorship is granted, I will have access to the main trust. It is worth 50 million eras. 50,000 is a drop in the bucket. I will cut you a check the day the judge signs the order. Thorne was silent for a long moment, weighing the risk against the reward. He knew the Sullivan name. He knew the money was real even if Tyler didn't have access to it yet. Greed, as it always does, tipped the scale. I will need his full legal name and date of birth, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. And Tyler. If we do this, the file needs to show rapid deterioration. We will call it aggressive early-onset Alzheimer's combined with paranoid delusions. I will write up the notes tonight. According to my records, I have been seeing Conrad Sullivan since last November. You are a lifesaver, Aris. Tyler breathed relief washing over him. I am not a lifesaver, Thorne corrected him coldly. I am an investment. Make sure you don't default on the payment, or the only person going to jail will be you. Tyler hung up the phone, a twisted smile forming on his face. He walked out of the bathroom looking at Brittany with the eyes of a man who thought he had just won the lottery. He didn't know that every word of that conversation had been recorded by the tiny, high-fidelity bug my private investigator had slipped into his jacket pocket days ago. He thought he was buying a diagnosis. In reality, he was buying himself a prison sentence. While Tyler was celebrating his cleverness in that filthy motel bathroom, I was sitting in my library with a glass of water and a pair of high-fidelity noise-canceling headphones. The room was dark, lit only by the spectral glow of my laptop screen, which displayed a frequency waveform moving in real time. Next to me stood Vince, a private investigator who looked more like a college professor than a man who specialized in high-stakes surveillance. He had been on my payroll for 20 years, usually vetting potential business partners, but this week his target was much closer to home. When the tow truck driver had hooked up Tyler's Porsche 2 nights ago, he hadn't just reclaimed the vehicle. Under my strict instructions, he had slipped a microscopic listening device into the lining of Tyler's favorite jacket, the one he had left on the passenger seat. Tyler, in his haste to salvage his wardrobe during the repossession, had grabbed the jacket without checking the pockets. He was now wearing a wire directly into the heart of his own conspiracy. I pressed play on the audio file Vince had just uploaded. The sound of the motel bathroom exhaust fan hissed through my headphones, followed by my son's voice. It was crystal clear, stripping away any remaining doubt I might have harbored about his character. I heard him dialing. I heard him negotiating with Dr. Thorne. I heard him sell his father's freedom for a promise of future money he didn't even have. We need to step in legally, Aris. We need to take control before there is nothing left. The words hit me harder than any physical blow. I closed my eyes, visualizing my son sitting on a toilet lid, plotting my demise. He wasn't worried about my health. He wasn't concerned that I was actually sick. He was worried that I was spending his inheritance. To him, I wasn't a person anymore. I was a leaking bank account that needed to be plugged. I listened as he agreed to the $50,000 bribe. I listened as he laughed when Thorne suggested the diagnosis of aggressive early-onset Alzheimer's. You are a lifesaver, Aris, or a lifesaver. That sentence echoed in my mind. He called a man a lifesaver for agreeing to destroy my life. For a moment, the father in me wanted to vomit. I remembered teaching Tyler to fish on the lake in Wisconsin. I remembered holding his hand when he got his tonsils out. I remembered the look of pride on his face when he graduated college. How had that boy become this monster? But then the businessman took over. The part of me that had survived bear markets and corporate raiders pushed the grief into a small locked box in the back of my mind. This wasn't a family tragedy anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy. This was fraud. This was a felony. Vince looked at me, his face grim. Do you want me to take this to the police now? Mr. Sullivan, we have enough for an arrest. I took off the headphones and looked at the waveform on the screen, now a flat line of silence. Not yet, I said, my voice steady. An arrest now would be too easy. He would claim he was desperate. He would play the victim. If we strike now, he might get a plea deal. No, Vince. We are going to let him play this hand all the way to the end. I wanted him to file the papers. I wanted him to stand in front of a judge and swear under oath that I was insane. I wanted him to commit fully to the lie so that when the trap finally snapped shut, there would be no wiggle room, no excuses, and absolutely no escape. I looked at the file name on the screen, Evidence Conspiracy 001. I saved it to 3 different secure cloud servers. Let him think he has won, I told Vince. Let him walk into court thinking he is the smartest man in the room. Because the higher he climbs, the harder the fall is going to be. And I intend to make sure he hits every single branch on the way down. The knock on my door came at 10 o'clock in the morning. It was not the rhythmic, polite knock of the concierge delivering a package. It was the sharp, authoritative rap of the legal system coming to collect a debt I did not owe. I opened the door to find a man I did not know, a process server with a face devoid of expression, holding a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Conrad Sullivan," he asked. I nodded. "You have been served," he said, thrusting the package into my chest, before turning and walking away without another word. I closed the door and walked to the kitchen island. I did not need to open the envelope to know what was inside, but I needed to see the specific lies my son had chosen to tell. I slid a silver letter opener under the flap and pulled out the stack of documents. The title page was stamped in red ink. Emergency petition for temporary guardianship of an incapacitated person. I skipped the legal boilerplate and went straight to the affidavit signed by Tyler Sullivan. As I read, I had to admire the sheer audacity of the narrative he had constructed. It was a masterpiece of fiction painting a portrait of a son so consumed with worry for his declining father that he had no choice but to intervene. The respondent, Conrad Sullivan, has exhibited a rapid and alarming cognitive decline over the past 6 months, the affidavit read. He has engaged in reckless financial behavior, liquidating assets without cause and cutting off long-standing family support systems due to paranoid delusions that his family is conspiring against him. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. He was using the consequences of his own betrayal as the evidence of my insanity. Because I had cut him off, I was paranoid. Because I had stopped funding his lifestyle, I was reckless. The document continued twisting every reality. It claimed I had forgotten names. It claimed I had been found wandering the lobby of my building in a state of confusion. It even referenced a fabricated incident where I supposedly left a gas stove running, a lie clearly planted to establish that I was a physical danger to myself. But the most painful part was the tone. Tyler had not written this like a greedy predator. He had written it like a heartbroken hero. "It is with a heavy heart that I file this petition," he wrote. "I simply want to ensure my father receives the medical care and financial protection he desperately needs. I am willing to take on the burden of managing his estate solely to preserve his legacy and safety." He was playing the role of the martyr. He was the dutiful son stepping up to save the senile old man from his own mind. It was a performance designed to make a judge weep and hand over the keys to my kingdom without a second thought. I looked at the hearing date. It was set for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. An emergency ex parte hearing, meaning they hoped to get the order signed before I could even mount a defense. They were counting on me being too confused, too slow, or too scared to fight back in less than 24 hours. They were counting on the old Conrad, the one who sent birthday texts and waited for replies that never came. But that man was gone. I picked up my phone and dialed Kowalski. "I just got the papers," I said, when he answered. "Good," Kowalski replied, the sound of paper shuffling in the background. "My team has already drafted the counter motion, and Conrad Vince just sent over the surveillance footage from the motel. We have the video of Tyler rehearsing his testimony. He practiced crying. I looked at the affidavit one last time at the signature of the son I had raised. Let him cry, I said. I want him to give the performance of a lifetime. Because when I walk into that courtroom tomorrow, I am going to make sure it is his final act. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and stale lies. I sat at the defense table, my hands folded calmly over a leather notebook, watching my son deliver the performance of a lifetime. Tyler sat in the witness box, his posture slumped just enough to convey the heavy burden of a heartbroken child. He had traded his flashy Italian suit for a modest charcoal one, a costume designed to scream responsibility rather than arrogance. He even dabbed at his dry eyes with a white handkerchief, a prop I had never seen him use in 30 years. "Your Honor," Tyler said, his voice cracking with practiced precision. "It keeps me up at night. The dad I knew, the man who raised me, would never cut off his family. He would never leave his daughter-in-law stranded. This paranoia, this anger, it isn't him. It is the disease talking." He looked at the Judge Marilyn Sterling, with pleading eyes. "I don't care about the money. I really don't. I just want him safe. Last week I found him wandering the lobby of his building, screaming at the security guard about spies. He left the gas stove on for 2 days. If we hadn't stopped by, he could have burned the whole building down." I sat frozen, marveling at the audacity. The gas stove incident was a complete fabrication, a lie planted to establish that I was a physical danger to myself and others. But to an outsider, it sounded terrifyingly plausible. Judge Sterling leaned forward, her expression softening into sympathy. She looked from the weeping son to the silent father, and I could see the narrative taking root in her mind. To her, I was just another stubborn senior citizen in denial, and Tyler was the loving son trying to prevent a tragedy. Then came the closer. Dr. Eris Thorne took the stand. He walked with the confident stride of a man who had sold his integrity long ago. He adjusted his rimless glasses and opened a thick medical file, a file that had been created out of thin air less than 48 hours ago. "Your Honor," Dr. Thorne stated, his voice smooth and authoritative, "I have been treating Mr. Sullivan for 6 months. His condition is consistent with rapidly progressing Alzheimer's, complicated by severe persecutory delusions. He exhibits extreme financial recklessness, often liquidating assets in a manic state to exert control when he feels his grip on reality slipping." Thorne held up a chart pointing to colorful lines that supposedly tracked my cognitive decline. "In my professional opinion," he continued, looking directly at the judge, "Mr. Sullivan lacks the capacity to manage his own affairs. If this guardianship is not granted immediately, I fear he will be destitute or dead within the year." The courtroom went silent. The weight of the doctor's testimony hung in the air like smoke. Judge Sterling turned her gaze toward me. It wasn't a look of judgment anymore. It was a look of pity. That was the worst part. She was looking at me like I was already gone, a shell of a man who needed to be managed by the very people trying to rob him. "Mr. Sullivan," the judge said softly, "do you have any response to this testimony? Do you understand why your son is asking for this authority?" I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. I did not look at the judge. I looked at Tyler. He had stopped crying. He was watching me from the plaintiff's table, and for a split second, the mask slipped. A tiny triumphant smirk played on his lips. He thought he had done it. He thought he had checkmated the old man. He had no idea that I wasn't playing chess. I was playing poker, and I was about to show my cards. I stood up from the defense table, not with the shaky frailty my son had just described, but with the fluid, calculated precision of a man who had spent 40 years closing deals that shaped the national economy. The silence in the courtroom shifted instantly from pity to confusion. They were expecting a confused geriatric in a cardigan, mumbling about lost keys and forgotten names. Instead, they were looking at a predator in a $10,000 bespoke Brioni suit, the fabric dark as midnight and sharp enough to cut glass. I adjusted my silk tie, feeling the eyes of the room adjust to this new reality. I saw Tyler's smirk falter. He blinked, unsure of what he was seeing. He had convinced himself so thoroughly of his own lie that seeing the truth standing 6 feet tall in front of him must have felt like a hallucination. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. In my world, the person who speaks first loses. I simply turned my gaze toward Judge Sterling. I held her eyes, letting her see the clarity, the focus, and the icy intelligence that burned there. There was no fog of dementia. There was only the cold, hard steel of resolve. The bailiff, who had been leaning casually against the wall, straightened up. The court stenographer paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the electricity of a storm about to break. I walked slowly around the table, my Italian leather shoes making a rhythmic, authoritative click against the floor. I stopped directly in front of Dr. Thorne. The good doctor who moments ago had been pontificating about my cognitive decline suddenly looked very small. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as he avoided my gaze. He knew. In that split second, he knew he had bet on the wrong horse. I turned back to the judge, offering a single respectful nod. Then I looked at my lawyer, Saul Kowalski. He was sitting with his arms crossed, a shark waiting for the water to fill with blood. I didn't give a verbal command. I just raised 2 fingers slightly, a gesture I had used for decades to signal the execution of a hostile takeover. Kowalski stood up. He didn't rush. He picked up a remote control and a flash drive with the slow deliberation of an undertaker. He walked to the center of the room, plugging the drive into the court's presentation system. The large screens mounted on the walls flickered to life. "Your Honor," Kowalski said, his voice deep and gravelly, filling the silent room. "Before you make a ruling on Mr. Sullivan's mental capacity, the defense would like to submit Exhibit A. We call this piece the rehearsal." Tyler started to rise from his seat, panic flashing in his eyes. "Objection," he stammered. "This wasn't submitted to us. We haven't seen this." "Sit down, Mr. Sullivan." The judge ordered, her voice sharp. "Overruled. Play it, counselor." Kowalski pressed the button. The screens went black for a second, then illuminated with the grainy greenish footage of a cheap motel room. The sound of a bathroom exhaust fan filled the sophisticated acoustic space of the courtroom. And then my son's voice, clear and damning, echoed off the mahogany walls. The trap was sprung, and the old wolf was watching it close. The video on the large courtroom monitors was grainy shot from a hidden angle that captured the entire cramped interior of the motel room. The contrast between the polished mahogany of the courtroom and the stained, peeling wallpaper on the screen was jarring. The audio hissed with static for a moment, before snapping into terrifying clarity. It was the sound of my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. On the screen, Tyler was shirtless, sweating, holding a bottle of cheap vodka. Brittany was sitting on the edge of the bed, filing her nails, looking bored. "We just need the signature," Tyler said on the recording, his voice slurring slightly, but filled with venom. "Once Thorne signs the affidavit, we get the emergency order. We take control of the accounts by Friday." "But what if he fights it?" Brittany asked in the video. "What if he hires lawyers?" "He won't," Tyler scoffed, taking a swig from the bottle. "We cut off his money. We cut off his transport. He is trapped in that penthouse. By the time he realizes what is happening, I will be his legal guardian. I will put him in that state facility in Gary. The one with the locked ward. He will be too medicated to call anyone." The courtroom was so silent, you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Judge Sterling was leaning forward, her eyes wide, her mouth set in a hard line. Tyler, sitting at the plaintiff's table, had turned the color of ash. He wasn't crying anymore. He was staring at his own digital ghost, watching his carefully constructed mask disintegrate frame by frame. Then came the line that sucked the air out of the room. On the screen, Tyler stopped pacing and looked directly at Brittany. "Honestly, it would be better if the old man died soon," he said, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. "Ideally, the stress gives him a heart attack. If he kicks the bucket next month, we bypass the guardianship and go straight to probate. I need that money to pay off the loan sharks, Brittany. If I don't give them $2 million by the first of the month, they are going to break my legs. So yeah, if he dies, it solves everything." Kowalski pressed a button and the screen went black. The echo of my son wishing for my death seemed to bounce off the walls. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. The court reporter had stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys in shock. The bailiff was glaring at Tyler with open disgust. I looked at the judge. The pity she had felt for the weeping son 5 minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by the cold fury of a woman who realizes her court is being used as a weapon for murder. Tyler stood up, knocking his chair over. "That is out of context," he screamed, his voice high and hysterical. "That is... They faked it. That isn't me. Sit down, Mr. Sullivan." "Judge." Sterling slammed her gavel down so hard it sounded like a gunshot. Her voice wasn't soft anymore. It was thunder. "You will sit down and you will be silent or I will have you gagged." Tyler collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He knew. Everyone knew. The game was over. He hadn't just lost the argument. He had revealed the monster beneath the skin. And I, the father he wanted dead, sat just 10 feet away, watching him drown in the truth he had tried so hard to hide. Judge Sterling stood up slowly, her eyes fixed on Dr. Thorne. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She did not look like a judge anymore. She looked like an executioner in black robes. She picked up the medical file that Thorne had submitted as evidence, the one containing the fabricated charts of my cognitive decline, and she held it up as if it were a piece of contaminated waste. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice shaking with a terrifyingly controlled rage, "I am going to ask you one question, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer, because the penalty for perjury in a capital case is severe, and the penalty for lying to me is worse. Did you write these notes based on actual in-person patient evaluations? Or were they dictated to you by the plaintiff in exchange for a future payout?" Thorne crumbled instantly. He was a coward who preyed on the weak, and when faced with true authority, he folded like wet cardboard. He looked at Tyler, desperate for a lifeline, but Tyler was staring at the table, paralyzed. Thorne looked back at the judge, sweat glistening on his forehead. I relied on family testimony." "Your Honor," Thorne stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I was led to believe." "So you lied?" the judge snapped, cutting him off. "You submitted a sworn affidavit to this court based on hearsay and greed. Bailiff, take Dr. Thorne into custody. I am holding him in contempt of court. And clerk, send a certified transcript of this hearing immediately to the State Medical Board with my personal recommendation for the immediate revocation of his license. Get him out of my sight." 2 officers moved in on Thorne, grabbing him by the arms. Tyler watched in absolute horror as his star witness, the man he had bribed to seal my fate, was dragged out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Then Judge Sterling turned her gaze to Tyler. It was a look of pure disgust. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, "in 20 years on the bench, I have never seen such a flagrant, malicious abuse of the legal system. You did not come here to protect a vulnerable father. You came here to weaponize this court, to commit grand larceny. You tried to strip a competent citizen of his civil rights to cover your own gambling debts." Tyler tried to stand up, his hands shaking. "Your Honor, please, "Silence," she commanded, slamming her gavel down. "This petition for guardianship is dismissed with prejudice. That means you can never file it again. Furthermore, I am issuing a bench order for a full forensic investigation into your involvement with Dr. Thorne. If I find that money changed hands, I will personally hand the file to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." She looked at me, her expression softening just slightly. "Mr. Sullivan, you are free to go, and you have the apologies of this court." I nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor." The gavel banged one last time, sealing the verdict. Tyler turned pale, the color draining from his face until he looked like a wax figure melting under heat. He looked at me. For the first time in his life, there was no arrogance, no entitlement, no smug sense of superiority. There was only fear, pure, unadulterated terror. He realized then that he hadn't just lost a lawsuit. He had kicked a hornet's nest thinking it was empty, and now he was realizing that the swarm was not only alive, but it was coming for him. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked past him without a word. The air around him smelled of sweat and ruin. I didn't need to speak. The look in his eyes told me he finally understood that he had started a war he could never win. As the courtroom began to clear, the air was thick with the dust of my son's collapsed schemes. He sat frozen at the plaintiff's table, a statue of ruin in a cheap charcoal suit. His lawyer was already hurriedly packing his briefcase, eager to distance himself from a client who had just perjured himself into oblivion. Tyler stared at the empty space where his future used to be, his hands trembling on the polished wood. He didn't move when I approached him. He didn't flinch until I placed my hands on the edge of his table and leaned in, invading the personal space he had so desperately demanded just days ago. I brought my face close to his ear. I could smell the stale vodka sweating out of his pores, mixed with the acrid scent of fear. "You are worried about the perjury charge, Tyler?" I whispered, my voice low and intimate, like a father telling a bedtime story. "But that is the least of your problems. You should be worrying about the forensic audit currently taking place at Technovation." His head snapped up. His eyes met mine, wide and bloodshot. The confusion was genuine. He had compartmentalized his life so thoroughly that he couldn't understand how the old man he tried to institutionalize knew about his corporate books. What he breathed. "How do you know about the audit?" "That is my business. You don't know anything about my business. I know everything," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I know that for the last 18 months, you have been siphoning capital from the operating budget into offshore shell accounts. I know you classified your gambling losses as research and development expenses. $2,140,000, Tyler. That is the exact number you embezzled." He shook his head, denial his last refuge. "That is company money. It is between me and the angel investor. It has nothing to do with you. The board will handle it." I smiled. It was a cold, wolfish baring of teeth. "Who do you think the investor is, Tyler?" I asked softly. "Who is Zeus Capital? Did you really think a stranger would pour $50,000 a month into a startup that hasn't produced a single profitable product in 5 years? Did you think the world was just that kind?" The realization hit him like a physical blow. The color drained from his lips. He looked at me, really looked at me, and saw the truth he had been blind to for a decade. "It was you," he mouthed, the sound failing to escape his throat. "It was always you." "It was me," I confirmed. "I was the one keeping the lights on. I was the one funding your ego trip. And that means you didn't just steal from a faceless corporation to pay your bookies. You stole from me. Again. And unlike a father, a defrauded majority shareholder doesn't offer forgiveness. He files federal charges for wire fraud and embezzlement." I straightened up and buttoned my jacket, looking down at the man who had tried to erase me. "Run, Tyler," I said. "But don't run home. The FBI is already waiting for you in the lobby." He didn't make it to the revolving doors. Tyler was walking fast, his head down, clutching his briefcase to his chest, as if it contained the fragments of his life, but he was moving blindly. He pushed through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom and into the cavernous marble atrium of the federal building, desperate for the cold air of the street, desperate to call his broker, desperate to find a way to spin this disaster. But the lobby wasn't empty. Standing directly in his path, flanked by the pillars of justice he had tried to manipulate, were 2 men in dark, ill-fitting suits. They weren't court security. They weren't local police. They had the distinct, terrifying stillness of federal agents. Tyler stopped. He tried to sidestep, to weave around them like he was dodging a pedestrian on a busy sidewalk, but they moved with him, blocking his path with practiced efficiency. One of them, a man with graying hair and eyes that had seen every variety of white-collar criminal, reached into his jacket. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled a badge. "Tyler Sullivan," the agent said, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged space. "I am Special Agent Miller with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant for your arrest." Tyler let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "This is a mistake," he stammered, looking around at the people passing by, lawyers and clerks who were stopping to watch the spectacle. "My father is confused. This is a family dispute. It is a civil matter." "It is not civil, Mr. Sullivan," the agent corrected him, stepping forward to close the distance. "You are being charged with 18 counts of wire fraud, securities, fraud and embezzlement involving the misappropriation of investor funds from Technovation Solutions." He reached out and took the briefcase from Tyler's trembling hands, handing it to his partner. Then he pulled out a pair of steel handcuffs. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." I stood at the top of the marble staircase, watching the scene unfold below. Kowalski stood next to me, checking his watch. "You sent the files?" I asked quietly. "Sent, received, and processed," Kowalski confirmed. The forensic audit of his startup accounts showed the transfers going directly to offshore sports betting sites. It took the feds about 20 minutes to get a judge to sign the warrant. They don't like it when startup CEOs treat investor capital like a personal piggy bank. Down below, the metal cuffs clicked shut around my son's wrists. The sound was sharp and final. Tyler looked up then. He scanned the balcony level until his eyes locked onto mine. There was no anger left in his face, just a hollow, gaping shock. He realized finally that I hadn't just cut him off. I had handed him over to the only entity more unforgiving than a disappointed father, the United States government. He was processed that afternoon. Because the charges were non-violent financial crimes, and because his assets were already frozen, the magistrate granted him bail, but with strict conditions. He had to surrender his passport. He had to wear a GPS ankle monitor, and he was confined to his registered residence. The irony was perfect. His registered residence was no longer the 6-bedroom mansion in the suburbs. He had been evicted from there. His residence, according to his latest filing with the court clerk, was room 104 of the Sleep Ease Motel. He walked out of the federal building 6 hours later, an electronic shackle strapped to his ankle, blinking a steady red light. He couldn't run. He couldn't hide. He couldn't leave the city limits. He was trapped in a cheap motel room with a wife who despised him, waiting for a trial that would almost certainly end in a prison sentence. I watched him get into a taxi from across the street. His shoulders slumped, a broken man heading back to a life he had built with his own arrogance. The space he had asked for had become a cage. While my son sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the blinking red light of his ankle monitor, Brittany decided it was time to launch her counteroffensive. She did not choose the courtroom or the police station. She chose the only court where she felt she could still win, the court of public opinion. I received a notification on my phone at 8 o'clock that evening. Brittany Lifestyle is live the truth about my family. I clicked the link. The screen filled with her face. She had stripped off the designer makeup, pulled her hair back into a messy bun, and positioned herself so the peeling wallpaper of the motel room was clearly visible in the background. She had set up a ring light, the glare reflecting in her eyes, which were already wet with fresh manufactured tears. "Hey guys," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know I haven't posted in a few days. I know you are wondering where the haul videos are. But I can't pretend anymore. I can't keep living this lie." The viewer count skyrocketed. 5,000. 10,000. People love a car crash, especially when the driver is someone they secretly envy. "My husband and I are safe for now," she continued, wiping her nose with a tissue. "But we are currently in hiding. We had to flee our home. My father-in-law—" She paused for dramatic effect, letting a single tear roll down her cheek. "He is a monster. For years he has controlled us. He used his money to manipulate us. He told me what to wear. He told Tyler who he could be friends with. And when we finally stood up to him, when we finally said we wanted to be independent, he destroyed us." I watched, fascinated by the performance. It was a masterclass in victimhood. She didn't mention the embezzlement. She didn't mention the credit card fraud. She painted a picture of a tyrannical patriarch punishing his children for daring to breathe without his permission. He cut off our food money, she sobbed. He locked us out of our house in the middle of winter. He used his connections to frame Tyler for crimes he didn't commit. That is why we are in this motel. That is why we have nothing. We are terrified. We are starving. He wants to break us because he can't own us anymore. The comments section exploded. It was a digital riot. What a psycho, we need to find him. Drop his address, Queen. Let's cancel this old man. Nobody hurts our Brit. She was inciting a mob. She was weaponizing 50,000 strangers against me. She leaned into the camera, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I don't know what he is going to do next. He has so much power. But I have you guys. Please share this. Let the world know who Conrad Sullivan really is. Don't let him get away with abusing his family. She ended the stream, leaving a black screen and a comment section burning with hatred. I sat in my penthouse looking at the vitriol pouring in. They were calling for my head. They were threatening to find my building. They were doxing me based on old business records. Brittany thought she had just nuked my reputation. She thought she had won the narrative war, but she had made a critical, fatal error. She had assumed that I cared about the opinions of strangers. And more importantly, she had assumed that her followers were loyal to her person rather than her lifestyle. She had built her entire brand on aspiration, on the illusion of wealth. By exposing her poverty, she hadn't just attacked me. She had shattered the mirror her fans used to look at themselves. And she had done something else. She had made specific, verifiable claims about financial abuse on a public platform. She had called me a criminal. That wasn't just drama. That was defamation per se. And unlike the court of public opinion, the court of law required evidence. I picked up my phone and dialed Vince. Get the recording of that live stream, I ordered. Save the comments. Save the viewer metrics. And Vince, call the ad sales department of the streaming platform. I want to buy a primetime ad slot. It is time to show the world the receipts. I did not reply in the comments section. Engaging with a mob in the comments is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It only creates more heat and noise. I understood something that Brittany did not. She understood attention, but I understood distribution. She was broadcasting from a free account, begging for views. I was a man who could buy the airwaves she was broadcasting on. I contacted the advertising sales division of the platform she was using. I didn't want a standard slot. I wanted a total takeover. I purchased a targeted campaign specifically designed to appear on the screens of every single person who followed the channel, Brittany. Lifestyle. I paid a premium for immediate placement. Within 2 hours, my response was ready. It was not a video of me crying. It was not a video of me denying the allegations. It was a video of data. The ad began with a black screen and a single sentence in white text. The cost of starvation. Then the scrolling began. It was a high-definition video capture of my bank statements from the last 10 years, filtered to show only the sub-accounts linked to Brittany's debit card. The numbers rolled up the screen like the credits of a movie, relentless and undeniable. January 14th. Hermes Birkin bag, ostrich leather, $28,000, paid by Conrad Sullivan. March 3rd. First-class tickets to the Maldives, $16,000, paid by Conrad Sullivan. The scroll accelerated. It showed the $3,000 dinners. It showed the weekly spa treatments that cost more than most people's rent. It showed the invoices for the personal stylist, the dog walker, the sommelier. It was an avalanche of consumption. At the bottom of the screen, a running total ticked upward in real time, spinning faster and faster until it locked onto the final number. $3,420,000. The text faded in again. This is not abuse. This is an allowance. The bank of Dad is closed. I hit the launch button, Across the city, thousands of phones lit up. The young women who had just been crying over Brittany's tragic story of poverty suddenly saw the receipts. They saw the lie. The internet is a volatile beast, but there is one thing it hates more than a villain, and that is a fraud. The tide turned instantly. I watched the metrics shift in real time. The comments on her original video stopped being supportive and started becoming vicious interrogations. "You said you were starving," one user wrote, "but you spent $5,000 on sushi last month. Show us the receipts." Britt, another, commented, his look real. "Yours look like tears." The hashtag #SaveBrittany vanished, replaced by #Brittany is a liar. She had tried to weaponize her poverty, but she had forgotten that her entire audience was built on people who worked hard for their money. By crying wolf while wearing a coat worth their annual salary, she had insulted them. I sat back in my chair watching her follower count drop by the hundreds every second. It was a digital hemorrhage. She had wanted to be famous. Now she was infamous. I didn't have to say a word. I simply let the ledger speak, and the numbers screamed louder than she ever could. The internet is a cruel and efficient executioner. It does not require a trial, it does not ask for a jury, and it certainly does not offer appeals. Within minutes of my advertising campaign hitting the servers, the digital landscape shifted beneath Brittany's feet with the violence of an earthquake. She was still holding her phone, still refreshing the feed, expecting to see more sympathy, more validation, more soldiers for her war against me. Instead, she saw the tide rushing out, revealing the ugly, jagged truth of the ocean floor. The hearts and crying face emojis were gone. In their place was a wall of green snake emojis, the universal symbol for a liar. The comments scrolled by so fast, they were a blur of hatred. "You spent $20,000 on a handbag while claiming you were starving. You are disgusting. Refund your sponsors. My dad works 2 jobs and you are stealing millions." Brittany tried to ban the dissenters. Her manicured fingers flew across the screen, tapping block, delete, block, delete. But for everyone she silenced, 10 more appeared. It was a hydra of indignation. She looked up at the camera, her face pale beneath the harsh glare of the ring light, her eyes darting back and forth like a trapped animal. "Guys," she stammered, her voice shrill and breaking. "That is fake. He photoshopped those bank statements. You have to believe me. He is trying to trick you. But belief is a currency, and she was bankrupt." Then came the notifications that hurt more than the insults. The corporate distancing. In the world of influencers, brands are terrified of controversy. They flee from it like rats from a sinking ship. It started with a notification from her biggest sponsor, a luxury skincare brand that paid her $5,000 a post. But they didn't just email her privately. To save their own reputation, they commented directly on her live stream pinned at the top for everyone to see. Lux Glow Official. "We are aware of the financial disclosures regarding this creator. Effective immediately, we are terminating our partnership with Brittany Sullivan. We do not condone fraud or the exploitation of family members." Brittany stared at the comment. Her mouth fell open. That contract paid for the lease on the Tesla. That contract paid for her Pilates classes. It was gone. Then came the fashion label. Then the vitamin supplement company. It was a domino effect of corporate cowardice. No brand wanted to be associated with a woman who burned millions of her father-in-law's dollars while pretending to be a victim. They weren't just firing her. They were publicly executing her career to save their own stock prices. "I lost everything," she whispered, the reality finally piercing through her delusion. Tyler, sitting on the bed with his ankle monitor humming, looked up from his own misery. "What happened?" "They are canceling me," she screamed, picking up the phone and throwing it onto the cheap duvet. "Everyone, the sponsors, the agency, they are all pulling out. I just lost $20,000 in monthly revenue in 5 minutes." She looked at her hands, the hands that had never done a day of hard labor in her life. She realized then that her influence, her power, her entire identity was just a digital rental, and the landlord had just changed the locks. She wasn't an influencer anymore. She was just an unemployed woman in a dirty motel room with a criminal husband and a very angry public. The screen of her phone lying face up on the bed continued to buzz with the vibrations of 1,000 strangers laughing at her demise. Tyler sat on the edge of the stained bathtub in the motel room, the only place he could find a moment of quiet away from Brittany's sobbing. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and desperation. He looked at the ankle monitor strapped to his leg, its green light pulsing in the dim room, a constant reminder of how far he had fallen. But Tyler Sullivan was not a man who accepted defeat. In his mind, he was still a visionary, a CEO, a man who just needed one lucky break to turn the tables. He pulled his phone from his pocket. His hands were shaking, but his mind was racing with a new, desperate theory. His father had claimed to be Zeus, the mysterious angel investor. But that had to be a lie. It had to be a bluff designed to crush him. His father was an old-school industrialist who made money in steel and shipping. He didn't understand tech. He didn't understand disruption. There was no way Conrad Sullivan was the visionary voice behind the encrypted emails and the strategic guidance Tyler had received for 5 years. "Dad is lying," Tyler whispered to himself, the sound bouncing off the tiled walls. "He just wants to scare me. He is a silent partner, maybe. But the real Zeus, the man who manages the fund, he will listen. He cares about the return on investment." He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he had only dialed once before. Zeus Capital. Emergency line. He pressed call. He held his breath. The ringback tone sounded like a lifeline. 1 ring, 2 rings. Tyler rehearsed his pitch in his head. He would explain the legal trouble as a misunderstanding. He would frame the bad press as a smear campaign. He would ask for a bridge loan, just $2 million to settle the debts, get the ankle monitor off, and relaunch the brand. A voice answered. It was not his father. It was a woman, her voice cool, professional, and detached. Zeus Capital Executive Office. Tyler let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. See, he thought. It's a real firm. It's not just him. "Hello, this is Tyler Sullivan, CEO of Technovation," he said, trying to inject the old authority into his voice, though it cracked slightly at the edges. "I need to speak with the managing director immediately. It is regarding the solvency of the portfolio company. It is a matter of life and death for the asset." There was a pause on the other end. The silence stretched for an agonizing 10 seconds. Tyler squeezed his eyes shut, praying to a god he hadn't believed in until this morning. "Mr. Sullivan," the woman said, her tone unreadable. "We have been monitoring the news. The director is willing to meet with you. He believes a restructuring conversation is overdue." Tyler's heart leaped. Restructuring. That meant they still saw value. That meant they weren't walking away. "Yes," Tyler said, standing up, the hope flooding back into his veins like a drug. "I can be there in an hour. I just need to call my parole officer to get clearance for a business meeting. I can be at the downtown office." "The director will expect you at 10 o'clock tomorrow," she replied. "Do not be late. And bring all updated financial records." The line went dead. Tyler lowered the phone, a manic grin spreading across his face. He looked at himself in the dirty mirror. He looked tired. He looked broken. But he was still in the game. His father thought he had checkmated him, but Conrad had forgotten one thing. Business is not about family. It is about profit. And Tyler was convinced he could sell sand to a desert if given the chance. He walked back into the bedroom. Brittany was lying face down on the pillow. "Get up, Brittany," Tyler said, grabbing his suit jacket from the floor. "Stop crying. I just fixed it. I have a meeting with the money." He didn't know that the appointment he had just made wasn't a lifeline. It was a summons to the final circle of hell. He didn't know that the director he was going to meet was not a new savior, but the same wolf he had been running from, waiting patiently to devour the last scraps of his dignity. The elevator ride to the 75th floor took exactly 45 seconds, but to Tyler it felt like a lifetime. He stood alone in the mirrored box, adjusting his tie for the 10th time, trying to wipe the sweat from his palms onto his trousers. He had convinced himself that the address for Zeus Capital being in the same building as his father's penthouse was just a coincidence. After all, the Pinnacle was the most prestigious address in the city. It made sense that a high-powered investment firm would have an office there. It had to be a coincidence. It was the only lie he had left to hold on to. The doors slid open with a soft, expensive chime. Tyler stepped out expecting a receptionist, a waiting area, perhaps a logo on the wall. Instead, he stepped directly into a vast, open living space. The floor was Italian marble, cold and white. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, revealing the gray, churning sky over Lake Michigan. Tyler froze. He knew this room. He knew the smell of the old leather books and the faint scent of sandalwood. He had run through this room as a child. This wasn't an office. This was the penthouse. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing in the emptiness. "Is anyone here? I have a meeting with the director." There was no answer. The room was still save for the dust motes dancing in the pale light. In the center of the room, facing the massive window, was a high-backed leather armchair. It was turned away from him, a silhouette against the bright gray sky. A hand rested on the arm of the chair, holding a crystal tumbler of water. Tyler took a hesitant step forward, the GPS monitor on his ankle chafing against his skin. "Excuse me," he said, his voice trembling. "I was told to come here for a meeting with Zeus Capital." The chair did not move, but a voice drifted from it. A voice that was deep, familiar, and terrifyingly calm. "You are on time, Tyler. I always appreciated punctuality." Tyler stopped breathing. His blood turned to ice in his veins. The chair slowly swiveled around. There was no mysterious investor. There was no team of analysts. There was only Conrad Sullivan sitting comfortably in a cashmere sweater, looking at his son with eyes that held no warmth, no anger, just a profound clinical disappointment. Dad, Tyler whispered the word, scraping out of his throat. Conrad took a sip of water and set the glass down on a small side table. He gestured to the empty sofa across from him. "Sit down, Tyler. We have a board meeting." Tyler stumbled back, shaking his head. "No, this isn't real. You aren't Zeus. You don't know anything about tech. You hate startups. You told me the internet was a bubble. I told you that to see if you had the conviction to prove me wrong," Conrad said, his voice steady. "I created Zeus Capital 10 years ago as a vehicle to support you without crippling you with my name. I wanted you to build something on your own merits. I read every pitch deck. I approved every round of funding. I was the one who told you to pivot to software in 2018. Tyler fell onto the sofa, his legs giving out. The realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. Every email, every strategic advice, every check that had saved his company at the last minute, it had all come from the man he had called obsolete. The man he had tried to institutionalize. You. Tyler gasped, tears welling in his eyes. You gave me the money. Conrad leaned forward, his expression hardening. I gave you a shovel, Tyler. I hoped you would use it to build a foundation. Instead, you used it to dig a hole. And now we have reached the bottom. The room was quiet, but it was the silence of a funeral parlor, not a library. I picked up a thin blue folder from the side table and slid it across the marble surface toward Tyler. It moved with a hiss, stopping just inches from his trembling hands. He looked at it as if it were a loaded gun. In many ways, it was. Inside that folder were the dissolution papers for Technovation Solutions, drawn up by the finest corporate attorneys in Chicago. As the majority shareholder and the holder of the convertible debt, I am exercising my right to call the loan, I said, my voice devoid of the fatherly warmth he was probably hoping for. Technovation is insolvent, Tyler. The burn rate is sustainable only because I have been sustaining it. But Zeus Capital is closing its position. Effective immediately, we are ceasing all operations. Tyler looked up, his face pale and slick with sweat. You can't do that, he stammered, his voice rising in panic. We are on the verge of a breakthrough. The version 2 update is going to change everything. If you pull the funding now, the company dies. You lose your investment. You lose millions. I didn't blink. I have already lost millions, Tyler. I lost them the moment I thought money could buy you character. This isn't an investment anymore. It is a hemorrhage. And today I am applying the tourniquet. He stood up, pacing frantically in the small space between the sofa and the window. But I am the CEO. You can't just fire me. I am the face of the brand. I have interviews scheduled next week. I have a keynote speech at the tech summit. What am I supposed to tell them? Tell them the truth. I said, leaning back in my chair. Tell them that your seed funding has dried up because of gross mismanagement and embezzlement. Tell them that the genius CEO was actually just a boy spending his allowance on sports cars and validation. Tyler stopped pacing. The cruelty of the truth seemed to physically strike him. He looked at the city outside the skyline he thought he had conquered. He realized that without the invisible hand of Zeus holding him up, he wasn't a titan of industry. He was just another unemployed man in a suit he couldn't afford. But what about the debts, he whispered, his voice cracking. The corporate credit lines, the office lease, the vendors. If we liquidate, who pays them? The company pays them by selling off its assets, I explained calmly. The servers, the furniture, the intellectual property, whatever that is actually worth. And whatever is left unpaid, Tyler, falls on you. You signed personal guarantees for those loans. You didn't read the fine print because you thought the money would never stop. I watched him crumble. The arrogant posture, the tilted chin, the sneer of superiority, it all melted away, leaving a terrified child. He fell back onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. He wasn't crying for the employees who would lose their jobs. He wasn't crying for the product. He was crying because the costume had been ripped off. The play was over. The lights were coming on, and there was no applause, only the crushing weight of reality. I took a pen from my pocket and placed it on top of the blue folder. Sign the voluntary dissolution. Tyler, it is the only way to avoid a forced bankruptcy that will ban you from running a public company for a decade. Do the one professional thing you have ever done in your life. End it with dignity. He reached for the pen, his hand shaking so violently he could barely hold it. He signed his name. With that scratch of ink, the myth of Tyler Sullivan, the tech genius, was dead. I took the folder back. The rescue mission was complete. Now the rehabilitation could begin. The door to room 104 hit the wall with a hollow thud as Tyler stumbled inside. The cheap motel room was stiflingly hot, smelling of stale pizza and despair. Brittany was sitting on the edge of the unmade bed, surrounded by the wreckage of her luggage. She looked up, her eyes wide with a manic, fragile hope. She saw Tyler's empty hands. She saw the defeat etched into the slump of his shoulders. She didn't see a savior. She saw a dead end. Did you get it? She asked, her voice tight and high. Did the investor give us the bridge loan? Can we leave this place? Tyler laughed. It was a dry, broken sound that sounded like glass grinding together. He didn't look at her. He walked to the mini-fridge and pulled out a bottle of water, cracking the plastic cap. There is no investor, Brittany, he said, staring at the wall. There is no Zeus Capital. It was him. It was always him. My father was the one funding the company. He just fired me. He liquidated everything. It is over. We have zero. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Brittany stood up slowly. Her face twisted, transforming from anxiety into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The illusion she had married the golden ticket she thought she had secured had just evaporated. "You lied to me!" she screamed, grabbing a heavy glass ashtray from the nightstand and hurling it across the room. It shattered against the wall inches from Tyler's head. "You told me you were a genius. You told me you built that company. You are nothing but a fraud. Tyler, a pathetic daddy's boy." Fraud, Tyler spun around, his own rage finally boiling over. He had lost his company, his freedom, and his pride, and he wasn't going to take it from her anymore. "I am the fraud," he shouted, advancing on her. "You spent $3 million on clothes, Brittany. $3 million. You didn't love me. You loved the credit limit. You pushed me to fight him. You told me to cut him off. You said we didn't need him. This is your fault. Don't you dare blame me," she shrieked, clawing at his face. "I made you look successful. I built the brand. You are the one who embezzled money to gamble on sports. You are the criminal. I should have left you years ago." The argument descended into chaos. They weren't just fighting. They were tearing each other apart, verbalizing every resentment they had swallowed for 5 years. Brittany grabbed her suitcase, trying to drag it to the door, screaming that she was leaving him. Tyler grabbed her arm, shouting that she wasn't going anywhere with the jewelry he had paid for. They wrestled over the bag, knocking over the lamp, crashing into the thin drywall. It wasn't a fight between husband and wife. It was two drowning rats climbing over each other to breathe. Suddenly, the room was bathed in flashing red and blue light. The wail of a siren cut through their screaming. Someone in the next room, tired of the noise and the violence, had called the police. Heavy fists pounded on the door. "Police, open up!" Tyler and Brittany froze. The door swung open, revealing 2 uniformed officers with hands on their holsters. They saw the overturned lamp. They saw the shattered glass. They saw the scratch marks on Tyler's face and the wild look in Brittany's eyes. "Separate," the officer commanded, stepping into the room. "Hands where I can see them." They were dragged out of the room, not in handcuffs this time, but in shame. The other motel guests stood on the balcony smoking cigarettes and watching the show. Tyler stood by the squad car, panting, while Brittany sobbed hysterically to the other officer, claiming she was the victim. It was the absolute bottom. They had lost their money, their home, and their reputation. Now, in the harsh glare of the police lights, they had finally lost each other. The federal courthouse was a fortress of gray stone that seemed to suck the warmth right out of the air. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was sterile and cold, stripped of the theatrical drama that had played out in the family court just weeks earlier. This was not a place for emotional pleas or manufactured narratives. This was a place of arithmetic. The math was simple. Tyler had stolen $2 million, and the government wanted to know why. I sat in the back row of the gallery on a hard wooden bench. I was the only family member present. Brittany was gone, vanished into the wind the moment the money ran out, likely looking for another host to attach herself to. Tyler sat alone at the defense table. He wasn't wearing Brioni today. He was wearing a slightly ill-fitting suit provided by the public defender's office, a polyester blend that hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight. His hair, usually styled to perfection, was dull and unkempt. Next to him sat his lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named Ms. Halloway. She looked exhausted, burying her face in a mountain of case files. There was no dream team. There was no high-priced firm on retainer. When Tyler had used his one phone call to beg me for legal counsel, I had declined. I told him that a man who steals to gamble must bet on himself in court. The trial was brutally short. The evidence, much of it provided by my own forensic team, was irrefutable. The prosecution displayed the wire transfers on the monitors. They showed the dates, the amounts, and the destinations. They traced the money from the corporate accounts of Technovation directly to offshore sports betting sites in Antigua. It wasn't a complex scheme. It was sloppy, desperate theft. Tyler didn't take the stand. There was nothing he could say. He just sat there staring at his hands while the prosecutor painted him not as a visionary CEO, but as a spoiled child playing dress-up with other people's money. The judge, a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses, asked if the defendant had anything to say before sentencing. Tyler stood up slowly. His legs were shaking. He turned slightly, not to address the judge, but to look for me. Our eyes met across the divide of the courtroom. He looked for a nod, a sign, a checkbook, anything. I sat still. I offered him nothing but my presence. I was there to witness, not to intervene. "I am sorry," Tyler whispered to the room, his voice barely audible. "I just wanted to be successful." The judge was unmoved. "Mr. Sullivan," the judge said, his voice booming, "you were given every advantage in life. You had education, opportunity, and capital. Instead of building something, you chose to defraud investors and embezzle funds to feed a gambling addiction. This court finds no reason for leniency." The gavel did not slam this time. It came down with a dull, heavy thud. "I sentence you to 60 months in a federal correctional institution, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay full restitution of $2.1 million. Custody is effective immediately." 2 marshals moved in behind Tyler. They didn't rough him up. They simply instructed him to place his hands behind his back. I watched as the steel cuffs locked around his wrists. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He looked like a man waking up from a long, feverish dream into a cold, hard morning. As they led him away through the side door, he didn't look back at me again. He kept his head down, accepting the weight of the consequences I had finally allowed to fall upon him. The door clicked shut, and for the first time in 32 years, I was truly alone. And for the first time in 32 years, my son had a chance to become a man. The visiting room of the Federal Correctional Facility smelled of industrial strength, bleach, and despair. It was a cold, sterile box painted in a shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to drain the hope out of anyone who entered. I sat on a bolted-down metal stool, my hands resting on the scratched stainless steel table, waiting. I had left my phone, my watch, and my dignity in a locker outside. In here, I wasn't a millionaire. I was just visitor number 4 for inmate number 79201. When the heavy steel door buzzed open, my breath caught in my throat. Tyler shuffled in. The transformation was horrifying. Gone were the tailored Italian suits, the silk ties, and the manicured hair. In their place was a baggy, faded orange jumpsuit that hung off his frame. His head had been shaved to the scalp, revealing the vulnerability of his skull. He looked smaller. He looked like a boy who had been playing dress-up and had finally been stripped of his costume. He sat down across from me. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He just stared at me through the thick plexiglass barrier, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and confusion. He picked up the black phone on the wall. I picked up mine. "You look good, Dad." He sneered, his voice tinny through the receiver. "The outside world treating you well." "Enjoying the penthouse. I am doing fine, Tyler," I said softly. "I wanted to see how you are holding up." He laughed, a harsh barking sound that drew a sharp look from the guard in the corner. "How am I holding up? I am in a cage, Dad. I sleep on a cot the size of an ironing board. I eat slop. I shower with 30 other men. That is how I am holding up." He leaned forward, his face pressing against the glass, his breath fogging it up. The anger finally boiled over, exploding out of him like steam from a cracked pipe. "Why are you here?" he screamed, not caring about the other visitors. "Did you come to gloat? Did you come to see your masterpiece? You have $50 million in the bank. $50 million. You could have written a check. You could have paid the restitution. You could have hired the best lawyers in the country and got me probation. Why did you let them take me?" I watched him unravel. I watched him cry. It broke my heart. But I knew that fixing it would only break him further. "I didn't let them take you, Tyler," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. "You took yourself here. I just stopped standing in the way." "That is bullshit," he yelled, slamming his fist against the glass. "You have the money. You could have saved me. What kind of father has $50 million and lets his only son rot in prison?" "The kind of father who loves you enough to let you become a man," I replied. Tyler froze. He looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "For 30 years, I saved you." I continued, my voice trembling slightly with the weight of the truth. "I bought your grades. I bought your cars. I bought your career. I bought your wife. I paved every road you walked on so you would never stub your toe. And do you know what happened? You never learned how to walk. You became a crippled Tyler. You became a man who thought the world owed him everything because he never had to earn anything." I leaned in closer to the glass. "If I had paid that restitution, if I had bought your freedom one more time, you would have learned nothing. You would have gone right back to the gambling, the lying, and the fraud. You would have stayed a child forever. The money was the poisoned sun, and I finally stopped feeding it to you." Tyler stared at me, his chest heaving. The tears were streaming down his face now, but the rage was slowly being replaced by a terrifying, hollow realization. "I hate you," he whispered. "I know I said standing up to leave, and I can live with that. Because for the first time in your life, you are going to have to survive on something other than my checkbook. This sentence is the first thing you will ever truly earn. And maybe, just maybe, when you walk out of here in 5 years, you will finally be free." I hung up the phone. I turned around and walked toward the exit, listening to the sound of my son sobbing behind the glass. I didn't look back. I had done the hardest thing a father can ever do. I had let him fall so that he might finally learn how to stand. It had been a week since the heavy steel doors of the federal prison slammed shut behind my son, and the silence in my penthouse was absolute. It was a clean, sharp silence, the kind that comes after a violent storm has finally passed. I was standing by the window watching the rain wash the grime off the city streets when the intercom buzzed. I didn't need to check the camera to know who it was. Misery has a very specific way of ringing the doorbell. I buzzed her up. When the elevator doors opened, Brittany stepped out. The transformation was complete. The high-fashion influencer, who had once sneered at the thread count of my guest sheets, was gone. In her place stood a woman soaking wet, shivering in a thin trench coat that looked like it had been pulled from a discount bin. Her hair, once her crowning glory, hung in limp strands around a face devoid of makeup. She looked like a ghost haunting the ruins of her own ambition. She didn't walk with that arrogant click of heels anymore. She shuffled. She stopped in the middle of the living room, clutching a manila envelope to her chest, as if it were a shield. "Conrad," she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't offer her a drink. I didn't offer her a seat. I stood by the fireplace, my hands clasped behind my back, waiting for the pitch. I knew there was always a pitch. "I am leaving him," she said, rushing the words out. She stepped forward and placed the envelope on the marble coffee table. "Those are the divorce papers. I filed them this morning. I am dissolving the marriage on the grounds of his criminal conviction." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, calculating hope. "I realized you were right, Conrad. Tyler is a criminal. He lied to me. He dragged me down. I was a victim in all of this. I just want to come back to the family. I want to be your daughter-in-law even without him. I can help you. I can manage the house. I can take care of you. Please don't let me starve out there." I looked at the divorce papers. Then I looked at her. It was pathetic, really. She was a parasite whose host had died, and now she was trying to attach herself to the organism that had killed him. She thought that by discarding my son, she could buy my mercy. She didn't understand that loyalty even to a criminal was the only currency I respected, and she had just proven she had none. "I am afraid there is a misunderstanding, Brittany," I said, my voice cool and detached. "You were never married to the family. You were married to the money. And since the money is gone, and Tyler is gone, your position here is vacant." I walked over to the kitchen counter. I didn't pick up a checkbook. I picked up a small crumpled piece of paper I had torn off a bulletin board at the coffee shop that morning. I walked back to her and held it out. She reached for it, probably thinking it was a check or a contact for a lawyer. When she saw what it was, her face went slack with horror. It was a flyer. Bold black letters on neon yellow paper. Help wanted. Dishwasher. Night shift. Minimum wage plus tips. "What is this?" she stammered, staring at the paper as if it were infectious. "That is an opportunity," I replied. "You said you were starving. You said you needed a fresh start. That diner is looking for hard workers. It involves hot water soap and standing on your feet for 8 hours. It is honest work, Brittany. Something you have never done in your life." She looked at me with pure hatred, the mask of the victim slipping away. "You can't be serious. You expect me to wash dishes. I am a brand. You are a cautionary tale," I corrected her. "And this is my final piece of investment advice. Take the job. The tips are cash, and they don't ask for references." I pointed to the elevator. The doors slid open, waiting to take her back down to the street level, back to the reality she had tried so hard to escape. She crushed the flyer in her hand, threw it on the floor, and stormed out, her sobbing echoing in the hallway. I watched the numbers on the elevator descend. Ground floor. I bent down, picked up the flyer, and smoothed it out on the table. It was a good offer. It was a shame she wasn't smart enough to take it. The ink on the contract was still wet when I handed the pen back to the buyer. It was a Mont Blanc, a gift from my late wife 30 years ago, and I left it on the mahogany table along with the keys to the kingdom. Sullivan Logistics. The empire I had spent 40 years building from a single rusted truck into a global shipping titan was no longer mine. I had sold it to a European conglomerate for a sum that would make most men dizzy. But I didn't feel dizzy. I felt lighter. The weight of 5,000 employees, the fluctuating fuel prices, and the quarterly earnings calls had been lifted from my shoulders. I had ensured that every worker kept their job and their pension, a final act of loyalty to the people who had actually helped me build my fortune, unlike the son who had tried to steal it. The sale of the company was just the beginning of the purge. Next came the penthouse. The pinnacle, with its 75th floor views and its cold marble floors, was not a home. It was a mausoleum of memories I no longer wished to visit. I called the most aggressive real estate broker in the city and told her I wanted it gone within the month. She sold it in 3 days to a tech billionaire who thought the address would give him class. I didn't care who bought it. I just wanted to hand over the keys and walk away from the ghosts of Christmas dinners where no one spoke and birthday parties that were just excuses for networking. I spent the next week in a small conference room at the law firm overseeing the liquidation of my physical assets. The vintage car collection, the art in the vault, the vacation home in Aspen that we hadn't visited in a decade. It all went to the auction block. To the world, it looked like the erratic behavior of a man in crisis. The tabloids speculated that I was senile, that the stress of my son's trial had finally broken my mind. They were wrong. I wasn't breaking down. I was cashing out. When the dust settled, the liquid assets were staggering. But I didn't put the money into a new hedge fund. I didn't buy a yacht. I sat down with my estate planners and drafted the charter for the Sullivan Trust. It was an irrevocable charitable trust designed to fund trade schools and vocational training programs. It was money for plumbers, electricians, carpenters, and mechanics. It was money for people who wanted to work with their hands. People who understood the value of sweat equity, people who knew that you have to build something before you can own it. I signed the deed of transfer, moving 90% of my net worth into the foundation. The lawyers looked at me with pale faces. They asked if I was sure. They asked if I wanted to leave a trust for Tyler, perhaps a small stipend for when he was released. I looked at them and shook my head. No. I have already given him the most valuable thing I possess. I gave him consequences. I kept a single bank account for myself, funded with enough cash to live comfortably, but simply for the rest of my days. I didn't need the billions. The money had become a poison in my bloodline, infecting my son and attracting parasites like Brittany. By giving it away, I was extracting the venom. I walked out of the law firm carrying a single leather duffel bag. It contained 2 changes of clothes, a few books, and a photo of my wife. I stood on the sidewalk looking at the city skyline one last time. I was no longer a titan of industry. I was no longer a target. I was just a man finally free from the golden handcuffs I had forged for myself. The sun hangs low over the rolling hills of Val d'Orcia, casting long golden shadows across the rows of Sangiovese vines that stretch out like the lines of a well-written poem. The air here smells different than it did in Chicago. It smells of rosemary dry earth and the sweet, heavy scent of ripening grapes. I am sitting at a long, rough-hewn oak table under a pergola covered in wisteria, the kind of table that has absorbed a century of wine spills and laughter. 6 months ago, my view was a wall of steel and glass, and my schedule was a prison of 15-minute intervals. Today, my only appointment was with the sunset, and I am right on time. I am not alone. For the first time in decades, the people sitting around me are not there because they want a job or a loan or a favor. They are here because we share a passion for the work. To my left is Matteo, an old man with hands like tree bark, who has tended this vineyard since before I made my first million. We argue affectionately about the weather and the soil almost every day. He treats me not as a titan of industry, but as a novice farmer who still has a lot to learn about the temperamental nature of the earth. Across from me are 3 young people who remind me of who I used to be before the money complicated everything. There is Luca, a 19-year-old aspiring stonemason from a village near Siena, whose tuition is paid for by the Sullivan Trust. Next to him is Sophia, who is studying sustainable agriculture, and Marco, who wants to be a master carpenter. They are eating bread dipped in fresh olive oil and talking excitedly about their projects. Luca is explaining the difficulty of restoring a medieval archway, and his eyes are shining with the pure, unadulterated joy of building something that will last. I pour more wine into Marco's glass. It is a simple table wine made right here on the estate, not the vintage reserves I used to hoard in my penthouse vault, but it tastes better than anything I ever drank in a boardroom. We are laughing about a mistake I made earlier in the day when I pruned a vine too aggressively. In my old life, a mistake was a crisis. Here, a mistake is just a lesson. I look around the table and I realize that for 40 years, I was the poorest man on earth. I had billions in the bank, but I was bankrupt in connection. I had a son who wanted my death, and a social circle that wanted my net worth. Now I have a vineyard I don't technically own, and a group of kids who call me Mr. Conrad instead of Sir. I take a sip of wine and listen to the crickets beginning their evening chorus. I think about Tyler sometimes. I hope that somewhere in his small gray cell he is finding a similar kind of clarity. I hope he is learning that stripping away the excess is the only way to find the essential. But I don't dwell on it. I turn back to Sophia, who is asking me about supply chains. I lean in ready to teach, ready to share, not to control, but to empower. This is what retirement looks like. It is not an ending. It is simply the first time in my life that I am actually living. The evening breeze was cooling the stone terrace, carrying the scent of wild rosemary and the lingering heat of the day. The laughter of the students had softened into a comfortable murmur, the kind of easy silence that exists between people who have nothing to prove to one another. I reached for the bottle of wine to refill Matteo's glass, my hand steady and calloused from months of working the soil. Then my phone buzzed. It was a harsh, intrusive sound that cut through the symphony of crickets and conversation. I had almost forgotten the device was there. I rarely used it these days except to check weather reports or video call the estate lawyers. I picked it up. The screen glowed with a notification from an unknown number. The country code was +1. The United States. I swiped the screen to unlock it. The message was long, a block of text typed in a hurry, likely with trembling fingers in the dark of a cell. Dad, please. It is Ty. I paid a guy a fortune to use this for 2 minutes. You have to help me. It is hell in here. I am scared. There are gangs. I owe money for protection. They said they will hurt me if I don't pay up by Friday. Please, Dad. I know you are mad, but don't let me die. Just wire $5,000 to this Venmo account. I will pay you back. I swear. Please save me. I read the words twice. The old Conrad, the man who wore suits and controlled boardrooms, felt a phantom pain in his chest. It was the instinct of a father, the biological imperative to protect his young. My thumb hovered over the keypad. It would be so easy. $5,000 was nothing to me. It was less than the cost of the wine we had drunk last week. I could wire it in seconds. I could buy him safety. I could stop his fear. But then I looked at the words again. I paid a guy. I owe money. I will pay you back. Even in prison, stripped of everything, Tyler was still hustling. He was still breaking the rules, bribing guards or inmates, finding a workaround rather than facing the reality of his sentence. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't asking for a connection. He was asking for a bailout. He was treating prison like just another bad business deal that could be fixed with a wire transfer. If I sent the money, I wouldn't be saving him. I would be confirming everything he believed, that rules don't apply to Sullivans and that Daddy will always fix it. If I paid for his protection now, I would be paying for it for the next 5 years. He would never learn to survive on his own. He would never learn that actions have consequences that cannot be bought off. I looked up from the screen. Luca was watching me, concerned. Is everything all right, Mr. Conrad? He asked. I looked at the young stonemason, a boy who worked 10 hours a day to build a future, who had never asked me for a dime he didn't earn. I looked at the rolling hills of Tuscany disappearing into the twilight. I looked back at the phone one last time. I didn't type a reply. I didn't lecture him. I didn't say I loved him. Silence was the only answer he needed. It was the only answer that would force him to finally grow up. I pressed the power button, holding it down until the screen went black. Everything is fine, Luca, I said, placing the phone face down on the table. Just a wrong number. I picked up the wine bottle and poured. The red liquid swirled in the glass, catching the last light of the day. I took a sip and turned my back on the digital ghost of my son, choosing instead the real, honest life I had finally found. The phone screen was still glowing in the twilight, casting a pale, artificial light onto the weathered oak table. I looked at the name at the top of the chat. Tyler. For 30 years, that name had triggered a reflex in me. It was a reflex to fix, to pay, to smooth over, to save. It was a Pavlovian response where his crisis became my emergency. I felt the vibration again. He was typing another message. Probably a bargain. Probably a promise that this time would be different, that he had changed, that he just needed one last lifeline. But as I sat there, surrounded by the scent of wild rosemary and the gentle murmur of my friends, I realized something profound. The lifeline was not strangling him. It was strangling me. I had spent a lifetime building a fortress of wealth to protect my family, but I had forgotten that a fortress can easily become a prison if you lock yourself inside with the wrong people. I looked at the 3 dots in the corner of the screen. The menu dropped down. The option was there, written in red text like a warning sign. Block contact. My thumb hovered over the glass. In the past, I would have felt guilt. I would have felt the crushing weight of paternal obligation. But tonight, all I felt was the cool evening breeze on my face. I pressed the button. A confirmation box popped up asking if I was sure. I didn't hesitate. I tapped yes. The messages vanished. The typing indicator stopped. The digital tether that had bound me to his toxicity for so long was finally severed. I placed the phone face down on the table. It was just a piece of metal and glass now silent and inert. A smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of triumph or vengeance. It was the soft, quiet smile of a man who has finally set down a heavy load after walking 1,000 miles. The air seemed to get lighter. The colors of the sunset deepened, shifting from gold to a rich, bruising purple. I looked around the table. Matteo was pouring the last of the wine. Sophia was laughing at something Luca had said, her face illuminated by the hanging lanterns. They were happy. They were free. And for the first time, so was I. I reached out and took the stem of my wine glass. The crystal felt cool and solid in my hand. I swirled the dark red liquid, watching the legs run down the side. I stood up slowly and walked to the edge of the terrace, looking out over the valley that was now draped in shadow. The world was vast and beautiful and faux. The tragedy of Tyler Sullivan teaches us a harsh but necessary truth. Money can build an empire, but it cannot build character. By constantly shielding his son from consequences, Conrad wasn't protecting him. He was preventing him from growing. True love isn't about solving every problem with a checkbook. It is about having the courage to let someone fall so they can learn how to stand. Ultimately, the story reminds us that peace is the most expensive luxury of all. You can't buy it, but you can secure it by setting boundaries. Protecting your energy is your highest responsibility. What is the hardest boundary you have ever had to set with a loved one? Share your story in the comments below. The first time I wasn't trying to buy it or control it. I was just existing in it. I raised my glass to the horizon, to the silence, to the future that was finally mine. I took a sip, tasting the earth and the fruit and the hard work that went into it. I closed my eyes and breathed in deep, filling my lungs with the sweet, clean air of Tuscany. I had lost a son, but I had found myself. I had lost a fortune, but I had gained a life. This silence, this distance, this absolute and beautiful boundary between my peace and his chaos, it was not an emptiness. It was a luxury. Personal space. It is the greatest gift of all.